In the silence of war and the echo of betrayal, the Mahabharata reveals the timeless struggle between duty and desire, love and vengeance. What if the choices we make today are only echoes of the ancient dilemmas that still shape our world? The Mahabharata is more than just a story. It is a living, breathing reflection of the complexities of life itself. Written thousands of years ago, it has remained an essential part of Hindu culture, an epic that weaves together themes of duty, morality, fate, and the eternal struggle between good and evil. It explores the very fabric of human existence, with its intricacies of choices, consequences, and the path that one must walk to fulfill one's duty, known as dharma. In its pages, each action ripples through time, creating a web of interconnected lives, each driven by their personal sense of duty and the consequences that follow. At the heart of the Mahabharata lies the battle for righteousness, where the forces of good and evil are not defined in black and white, but exist in shades of grey. The epic teaches that even those who walk the path of righteousness are not immune to hardship, while those who stray can find themselves consumed by their choices. In this grand narrative, the consequences of one's actions are as inevitable as the rising sun, shaping the fates of its characters in ways they cannot always control or foresee. The Mahabharata introduces us to two powerful families, the Pandavas and the Kauravas. The Pandavas, 5 brothers bound by blood, are the epitome of virtue and righteousness, though their journey is fraught with trials. Yudhishthira, the eldest, embodies wisdom and duty. Bhima, the second, strength and passion. Arjuna, the third, skill and valor in battle. Nakula and Sahadeva, the twins, loyalty and virtue. Together, they represent the varied aspects of the human condition: strength, intellect, courage, loyalty, and righteousness. The Kauravas, their cousins, stand as their adversaries. Born to Dhritarashtra, the blind king, and his wife Gandhari, the Kauravas are 100 sons, the most prominent among them being Duryodhana, the eldest. Whereas the Pandavas are driven by ideals of justice and dharma, Duryodhana is consumed by pride and ambition. His rivalry with his cousins begins early, escalating into a bitter struggle for the throne. His jealousy and envy shape his decisions, pushing him down a path that will ultimately lead to destruction. At its core, the Mahabharata is not merely a battle of armies, but a battle of ideologies. It examines how individuals are shaped by their circumstances, their decisions, and their understanding of dharma. The lives of the Pandavas and the Kauravas intertwine in a web of betrayal, love, war, and wisdom, each chapter of their lives unveiling profound lessons about the nature of good and evil, right and wrong, and the eternal conflict that resides in the hearts of all men. The birth of the Pandavas and the Kauravas marks the beginning of a story that will span generations, a tale of fate, ambition, and rivalry that will echo throughout the ages. The Pandavas, 5 brothers destined for greatness, were born under extraordinary circumstances. Their mother, Kunti, had been granted a boon by the sage Durvasa, enabling her to summon any god and bear a child by him. In her youthful curiosity, Kunti called upon the god of the sun, Surya, and was miraculously blessed with the birth of her first son, Yudhishthira, the embodiment of dharma and righteousness. The gods themselves bestowed their blessings upon Kunti, one by one. Bhima, the son of Vayu, god of the wind, whose strength would be unmatched. Arjuna, the son of Indra, king of the gods, a warrior of exceptional skill. And Nakula and Sahadeva, born of the Ashvins, twin gods of healing and medicine, whose grace and virtue would define them. Each birth was marked by wonder, with divine signs and symbols accompanying the arrival of the brothers. The circumstances of their births were nothing short of miraculous, yet despite their celestial heritage, they were raised in exile, far from the comforts of a royal court. The Pandavas were taught by the great masters of the land and grew to embody qualities that would set them apart as paragons of virtue. In contrast, the Kauravas, 100 sons born to King Dhritarashtra and Queen Gandhari, entered the world under less auspicious circumstances. Dhritarashtra, born blind, was unable to witness the birth of his children, and Gandhari, in her devotion to her husband, blindfolded herself for life. The Kauravas, though many, were born of the same royal bloodline, yet they were driven by greed, ambition, and rivalry from the very beginning. Duryodhana, the eldest of the Kauravas, was marked by an insatiable thirst for power, while his brothers, though numerous, followed his lead. Their birth was a sign of fate's cruel twist, for despite their numbers and their royal lineage, they would become the antagonists in the great struggle that would consume their world. From the moment of their birth, the Pandavas and the Kauravas were destined to be rivals. Their childhoods were filled with the whispers of competition, of who would inherit the throne, of who would stand victorious in the inevitable conflict that loomed on the horizon. The seeds of discord were planted early, as Duryodhana, driven by jealousy and insecurity, harbored a deep resentment toward the Pandavas. The sight of their strength, their wisdom, and their growing influence only deepened his hatred. The rivalry between the two families was not just a matter of royal succession, it was a clash of ideals, of righteousness versus greed, of dharma versus adharma. Thus, even in their infancy, the destinies of the Pandavas and Kauravas were sealed. The path of their lives, intertwined by fate yet divided by enmity, would lead them to the battlefield where their ultimate struggle for supremacy would unfold. The childhood of the Pandavas and Kauravas unfolded within the walls of Hastinapura, a kingdom brimming with royal splendor but also overshadowed by the tension between the two families. The Pandavas, though raised in exile, were never deprived of education and martial training. They were taught by the greatest sages and warriors of the land, learning the arts of archery, warfare, and governance. In the forests of their exile, they absorbed the teachings of the divine and the wisdom of the great sages who crossed their path. The Pandavas were not just skilled in the arts of war, but also in the moral and spiritual tenets that would guide them throughout their lives. Yudhishthira, the eldest, grew to embody the essence of Dharma, while Bhima's strength became legendary, Arjuna's skill with the bow unrivaled, and the twins, Nakula and Sahadeva, showed unmatched precision and wisdom. Their training was not merely physical but intellectual, as they were also instructed in the ancient texts, the Vedas, and the philosophy of life. Kunti, their mother, was a guiding force, nurturing their virtues with stories of righteousness and justice. Under their guidance, the Pandavas grew into paragons of virtue and wisdom, learning not just to fight for their kingdom, but to honor the principles of duty, honor, and righteousness. Meanwhile, the Kauravas, though born to royal lineage, were raised in a different atmosphere. Their childhood was marked by jealousy and resentment, particularly in the heart of Duryodhana, the eldest Kaurava. Unlike the Pandavas, who were trained under the tutelage of renowned teachers, Duryodhana's life was shaped by his envy and his desire to claim the throne of Hastinapura. His ambitions were nurtured by his uncle, Shakuni, whose dark counsel and manipulation fueled Duryodhana's hatred of the Pandavas. As the eldest, Duryodhana had expected to inherit the throne, but the rise of the Pandavas, with their virtues and growing popularity, became a threat he could not ignore. From an early age, Duryodhana was determined to outshine the Pandavas, especially his cousin Arjuna, whose prowess in archery threatened to overshadow him. The rivalry between Duryodhana and Arjuna intensified with each passing year, as Duryodhana saw in Arjuna a potential rival who would claim the throne that he so deeply desired. This jealousy and growing resentment bred an atmosphere of competition, where Duryodhana could not see the Pandavas as anything but obstacles to his rule. Despite their growing rivalry, the bond between the Pandavas remained strong. They shared a deep respect for each other, a unity that stood in stark contrast to the fragmentation within the Kauravas. As the children grew, so did the tension between the two families. Duryodhana's jealousy of the Pandavas became all-consuming, and he vowed to destroy them, no matter the cost. Yet, the Pandavas, grounded in their principles, remained steadfast, unaware that their greatest battle would soon unfold not in the training fields, but on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. The game of dice marked the turning point in the lives of the Pandavas, a game that would set the stage for years of hardship, exile, and unimaginable trials. It began as a scheme meticulously orchestrated by Duryodhana, with his uncle Shakuni as the mastermind, using deceit and manipulation to lure the unsuspecting Yudhishthira into a game that would cost him everything. The young king, despite his wisdom and moral compass, found himself caught in the snare of his pride and sense of duty. The game was not just a matter of royal leisure, it was a carefully planned trap designed to strip the Pandavas of their kingdom and bring them to their knees. The stakes of the game were high, but Yudhishthira, bound by his honor and the expectations of his elders, reluctantly agreed. One move after another, his fortunes slipped away, and with each roll of the dice, the Pandavas lost more than just material wealth. First, it was their kingdom. Then, it was their vast estates and riches. The game, however, didn't end there. In a final desperate move, Yudhishthira gambled away his own freedom, wagering not only his kingdom, but himself, his brothers, and even their mother, Kunti. In a devastating stroke of deceit, the Pandavas were forced into exile, with the promise of returning only after 12 years in the wilderness and 1 year of living in secrecy. The loss was not just of land and titles, but of their dignity and honor. The game of dice was not simply an act of fortune, but a brazen betrayal of the trust Yudhishthira had placed in his cousins and the court. The Kauravas, intoxicated by their victory, reveled in their newfound control, but the Pandavas, though humbled, were not broken. The exile, though harsh and full of suffering, would become the crucible in which the Pandavas' strength, unity, and resolve were forged. The theft of their kingdom left a bitter taste, but it also awakened within the Pandavas a determination to reclaim what was rightfully theirs. Their journey into the forest was not a retreat, but an opportunity for growth, reflection, and preparation. During this time, they learned valuable lessons, honed their skills, and drew closer as brothers. They were not the same men who had entered the palace to play the game of dice. They emerged as warriors of destiny, bound by fate and a desire for justice. The loss of their kingdom marked the end of their carefree days and the beginning of a long and arduous struggle to reclaim what had been unjustly taken from them. A struggle that would ultimately lead them to the blood-soaked fields of Kurukshetra. The 12 years of exile that the Pandavas endured in the wilderness were far from a mere period of wandering. They were a time of profound transformation, testing their endurance, faith, and unity. As they left their ancestral kingdom behind, their hearts heavy with loss, they sought refuge in the forests, determined to live in accordance with the harsh terms imposed by their enemies. The wilderness was both their sanctuary and their crucible, a place where they would face unimaginable hardships and, yet, emerge stronger than ever. During these years, the Pandavas found solace in the simplicity of nature, learning to live without the comforts of royal life. Yet, this exile was not merely physical, it was a spiritual journey, one that would deepen their understanding of duty, honor, and the complexities of life. The brothers, especially Yudhishthira, learned to transcend their previous identities as princes and kings, embracing the humbling reality of their new lives as hermits. Each day was a reminder of what they had lost, but also of what they stood to gain: justice, honor, and the kingdom that had been taken from them by treachery. As the years passed, the Pandavas' inner strength grew, and their devotion to Dharma deepened. They found guidance from sages, learned the art of warfare from great teachers, and sought wisdom from the spiritual leaders they encountered along their journey. Their resolve to reclaim their kingdom never wavered, and during their time in exile, they forged crucial alliances with powerful figures who shared their desire for justice. Among these alliances was the renowned warrior and mentor, Lord Krishna, who became not only a friend but a divine guide. Krishna, with his immeasurable wisdom, offered counsel that would prove invaluable in the days to come, helping the Pandavas navigate the complex web of politics and morality they found themselves entangled in. In the midst of their exile, the Pandavas faced a final trial, the year they were forced to live in incognito, a period in which they had to disguise their true identities and remain hidden from the world. The rules of their exile stipulated that if they were discovered during this secret year, they would be exiled for another 12 years. This was perhaps the most challenging period of their exile, as it required not only physical endurance but also immense self-control and discipline. The brothers assumed new roles and identities, living among strangers, their true nature concealed from all except a select few. The weight of their secret existence was a constant strain, but it also taught them the value of humility and the necessity of patience. By the time the Pandavas emerged from their year of incognito living, they were not the same men who had been defeated in the game of dice. They were wiser, more united, and more determined than ever to reclaim their birthright. The exile had not broken them. It had fortified their spirits, sharpened their skills, and deepened their understanding of their own purpose. The time in the wilderness had brought them not just closer to their destiny, but closer to each other, binding them with an unbreakable bond of brotherhood. After 12 years of hardship and spiritual growth in the forests, the Pandavas returned from exile with hearts full of purpose and eyes set on the future. The time of wandering had transformed them, and they now stood at the threshold of their destiny, eager to reclaim their rightful place as rulers of their kingdom. With their resolve fortified, they journeyed to Hastinapura, where the Kauravas held sway, and stood before King Dhritarashtra, demanding the land that was rightfully theirs. Yudhishthira, the eldest Pandava, spoke with the calm authority of a king, reminding Dhritarashtra of the unjust game of dice that had robbed them of their kingdom. They had lived in exile, suffering the hardships of forest life, and now it was time for their return. They sought nothing more than their share of the kingdom, a request rooted in justice, not greed. Their claim was not just for land, but for the right to rule as their birthright demanded. But Duryodhana, the eldest of the Kauravas, stood as an immovable barrier, refusing to acknowledge the Pandavas' plea. His heart, filled with jealousy and hatred, could not bear the thought of sharing power with those he saw as rivals. Duryodhana's refusal to grant them even a small portion of land marked the beginning of a crisis that could no longer be contained. The words he spoke were not those of a ruler seeking peace, but of a man determined to extinguish any claim the Pandavas had to the throne. As tensions rose, the subtle manipulations of Shakuni, Duryodhana's uncle, fanned the flames of discord. The situation rapidly deteriorated, and what could have been a moment of reconciliation became the first spark in a growing fire of enmity. Yudhishthira, though deeply hurt by Duryodhana's arrogance, remained patient, aware that their time would come. The refusal to grant the Pandavas their rightful share of the kingdom was not just an affront to them, but to the very principles of Dharma that upheld the social order. The Pandavas, with Krishna at their side, now had no choice but to prepare for the inevitable conflict. The road ahead was one of war, not negotiation. The refusal to honor the claim of the Pandavas was a challenge that could not be ignored, a challenge that would force the brothers into a confrontation that would shape the destiny of not only their family, but of the entire kingdom. As they left the court of Hastinapura, the air thick with tension, the Pandavas knew that the struggle for their kingdom had only just begun. The peace that had once been possible had slipped away, replaced by the grim certainty of battle. With Krishna's counsel, they gathered their allies and prepared to take back what was rightfully theirs. for they knew that this fight was not only for power, but for justice itself. The time for peaceful resolution had passed. The refusal of Duryodhana to yield even a single village to the Pandavas set the stage for the inevitable clash. In the heart of Hastinapura, both sides began to prepare for war, each gathering allies, resources, and weapons. The kingdom was now divided into two hostile camps, each resolute in its belief that it was in the right. But in the midst of this rising tide of violence, there was one last hope for peace. Krishna, ever the peacemaker, sought to bridge the growing chasm between the two families. He offered himself as a mediator, attempting to find a way to avoid the horrors of war. His wisdom had already earned him the respect of both the Pandavas and the Kauravas, and his presence at the negotiating table was seen as a sign of hope. Yet, despite his best efforts, Duryodhana's pride and arrogance could not be swayed. The Kauravas had made their decision, and there was no turning back. With no agreement reached, Krishna, ever loyal to the Pandavas, turned his attention to the battlefield. He offered his divine help, presenting Arjuna with a choice. He could either have Krishna's vast army, which was unrivaled in its power, or Krishna himself, but without the use of his army. Arjuna, deeply conflicted, chose Krishna, not for his army, but for the guidance and wisdom that Krishna would bring to the battlefield. In that moment, Krishna's role as the divine charioteer was sealed. As the war loomed on the horizon, the two armies gathered on the plains of Kurukshetra. The sun blazed above, casting long shadows as the soldiers took their positions. It was here, on this sacred battlefield, that the ultimate conflict would unfold. Before the first arrow was loosed, the moment arrived that would forever alter the course of the warand, the course of Arjuna's life. Arjuna, the greatest of the Pandava warriors, stood on the cusp of battle, his bow Gandiva in his hand. But as he gazed across the field at the enemy, his own relatives, teachers, and friendship was struck by a paralyzing doubt. His heart, filled with sorrow and confusion, trembled. How could he raise his bow against those he loved? The duty of a warrior seemed hollow in the face of such terrible choices. His mind clouded with grief. He lowered his weapon and sank into despair. It was in that moment that Krishna spoke. His words, ancient and timeless, were not just for Arjuna, but for all of humanity. Krishna, revealing his divine nature, began his teachings on the battlefield, speaking of duty, dharma, and the path to enlightenment. He instructed Arjuna to rise above his confusion and perform his duty as a warrior, regardless of the personal attachments that clouded his judgment. In the face of doubt and fear, Krishna imparted the wisdom of the Bhagavad Gita, showing Arjuna the deeper truths of life and death, of action and consequence, and the eternal nature of the soul. With Krishna's guidance, Arjuna found clarity. His hesitation was overcome by a profound realization. He would fight not because of personal vendettas, but because it was his duty as a warrior to uphold justice and righteousness. Krishna's words ignited a fire within him, a fire that would burn throughout the coming battle. With newfound resolve, Arjuna stood ready to face the enemy, knowing that the war was not just for land or power, but for the preservation of Dharma itself. As the first rays of dawn touched the plains of Kurukshetra, Arjuna, the mightiest of warriors, stood in his chariot, gripped by a storm of doubt. His eyes swept across the battlefield, taking in the vast army of the Kauravashi's cousins, teachers, and friends. The noise of the approaching war filled the air, but in that moment there was only silence in Arjuna's heart. His bow, Gandiva, once a symbol of unyielding strength and valor, felt heavy in his hands. The chariot's horses pawed nervously at the ground, sensing the unease of their master. In the face of battle, where his skill would determine the fate of kingdoms, Arjuna's heart grew cold with despair. His mind raced with the faces of those he would have to kill: his beloved teacher, Drona, his elder brother, Bhishma, his cousins and comrades. How could he raise his bow against those he had once called family? How could he strike down his elders, revered as paragons of wisdom and strength, and his kin, bound by blood and love. The very thought of it gnawed at him, leaving him shaken to the core. The weight of this moral crisis pressed down on him with suffocating force. Arjuna's purpose, once clear and resolute, now seemed like a distant memory. The honor of the battle and the glory of victory were no longer attractive to him. Instead, he saw only bloodshed, sorrow, and the destruction of all that he held dear. The righteousness of his cause felt uncertain, even illusory. Could the loss of so many lives, even in the name of Dharma, truly be justified? In this moment of turmoil, Arjuna lowered his bow, refusing to fight. His heart was torn, his body trembling with a mixture of sorrow and confusion. He turned to Krishna, his charioteer and divine guide, with eyes filled with desperation. "Krishna," he said, his voice heavy with grief, "I cannot fight this war. How can I kill my own kin? How can I harm those who have loved me and raised me? The pain of such violence will destroy me, and the shame will follow me for eternity. I would rather beg in the streets than engage in this slaughter." Krishna, ever the wise and compassionate guide, remained calm. He spoke not with anger, but with the serene authority that only divinity can bestow. "Arjuna," Krishna began, his voice resonating with the eternal wisdom of the universe, "your reluctance stems from attachment to your family, to your friends, and to the fleeting nature of life itself. But you must remember, you are a warrior. Your duty, your dharma, is to fight for what is just, not for personal gain or fear of loss. The soul is eternal, Arjuna. Bodies are mere vessels that are born and die, but the soul cannot be harmed. You must perform your duty without attachment to the results." Krishna's words sank deep into Arjuna's heart. His struggle was not with the enemy on the battlefield, but with his own inner conflict. He had to fight, not because of hatred, but because it was his sacred duty. This battle was not a personal vendetta. It was a battle for righteousness, a battle for Dharma. It was a struggle for the greater good of the world, for the preservation of justice and truth. With Krishna's counsel, Arjuna's despair began to dissolve, replaced by a calm understanding of his duty. He lifted his bow once again, his mind cleared and his heart resolute. Though the war would be long and fraught with pain, Arjuna knew that he could no longer shy away from his path. He was a warrior, bound by duty, and the time for action had come. As the conch shells blared across the vast plains of Kurukshetra, the atmosphere thickened with the weight of impending destruction. The earth itself seemed to tremble in anticipation as the two mighty armies stood ready for war. On one side, the Pandavas, their hearts resolute yet heavy with the burden of righteousness, lined up in formation. On the other, the Kauravas, led by Duryodhana, stood firm in their pride and desire for dominion. The air was alive with the clash of steel and the roar of war cries, yet beneath it all, a deep silence, hunger silence, that only those who stood on the edge of annihilation could truly feel. The vastness of the battlefield stretched as far as the eye could see, filled with warriors whose names would forever be etched in history. On the side of the Pandavas, Bhima, mighty in strength, stood like an immovable mountain. Arjuna, the unparalleled archer, readied his bow, Gandiva, in silence. Yudhishthira, their eldest brother, stood with a solemn expression, understanding the cost of what lay ahead. Nakula and Sahadeva, the twin sons of Madri, stood with unwavering focus, their swords glinting in the morning sun. Their army, though smaller, was united by the justice of their cause, and their hearts burned with the fire of righteousness. Across from them, the Kauravas, led by Duryodhana, filled the other half of the battlefield. The eldest Kaurava, driven by envy and ambition, gazed with a fierce determination in his eyes. Beside him stood his teacher, Drona, a sage of unmatched skill, whose loyalty to the Kauravas had been unwavering. Bhishma, their patriarch, stood at the front of their ranks, a man of great wisdom and strength, though torn by the knowledge that he was fighting against his own kin. Alongside them stood the great Karna, loyal to Duryodhana, and many other fearsome warriors, each eager for the destruction they believed their cause would bring. The battlefield was a sea of armored men, chariots, elephants, and cavalry. The earth seemed to groan beneath the weight of the armies, as the wind carried the smell of dust and sweat, mingled with the scent of impending death. Horses pawed the ground nervously, sensing the terror that loomed ahead. The great war drums thundered, reverberating like the heartbeat of the world itself, as the sun rose higher, casting an ominous glow upon the battlefield. It was in this charged moment that Lord Krishna, who had taken the role of Arjuna's charioteer, turned to face the mighty warrior. His gaze was calm, but his words carried the weight of destiny. "Arjuna," he said, his voice clear above the rising tumult, "the time for inaction is over. The battle that will decide the fate of all is now upon us. Do not falter. Fight with courage and honor." With the final sounds of the conch echoing through the air, the battle began. The earth shook beneath the fury of the first charge, and the heavens themselves seemed to hold their breath. What followed was a maelstrom of violence and bloodshed, a war like no other, where the very fabric of the world would be tested. The war at Kurukshetra had begun, and with it, the fate of the world was sealed. The first day of the Kurukshetra war dawned with the grim sound of conch shells, signaling the beginning of an era of violence and bloodshed. As the armies faced each other, the ground seemed to tremble beneath the weight of countless warriors, chariots, elephants, and horses. The sun cast its golden rays across the battlefield, a cruel reminder of the destruction that would soon unfold beneath it. On both sides, the warriors prepared themselves, their faces steely with resolve, their hearts heavy with the knowledge that the fate of many would be sealed that day. The battle began with a thunderous clash, as the first ranks of soldiers met with the brutal force of their enemies. Arjuna, with his bow Gandiva raised high, unleashed a flurry of arrows, cutting down foes with precision. His skills were unmatched, and even the fiercest Kauravas found themselves faltering in the face of his wrath. Yet, despite the brilliance of Arjuna's archery, it was clear that the war would not be decided by his skill alone. As the battle raged on, a series of key warriors began to emerge on both sides, each carrying with them the weight of their past, their alliances, and their legacies. On the side of the Pandavas, Bhima, the mighty son of Vayu, tore through the enemy lines with unparalleled strength. His war cry echoed across the field as he crushed his foes beneath him, his mace swinging with brutal force. He was a living embodiment of destruction, unstoppable once he was set upon his course. Alongside him, the younger brothers, Nakula and Sahadeva, fought with discipline and skill, their swords cutting down the enemy with sharp precision. The Pandavas' army, though smaller, fought with a unity forged through years of struggle and hardship. On the Kaurava side, the greatest warrior was Bhishma, the patriarch of the Kaurava family, who fought with a heavy heart but unmatched skill. His shield was impenetrable, and his lance struck with the deadly force of a thunderbolt. He stood as a towering figure, his white hair a stark contrast to the blood-soaked battlefield around him. Beside him, Dronacharya, the master of arms, led his warriors with unflinching authority, his teachings evident in the precision of his soldiers' movements. Karna, the fiery and loyal general, also played a crucial role, his arrows cutting through the ranks of the Pandavas with lethal grace. The initial skirmishes were brutal, with many warriors falling on both sides. The Kauravas suffered their first major casualty when Dronacharya's beloved student, the brave Abhimanyu, son of Arjuna, was ambushed and killed by a collective force of Kaurava warriors. His death was a tragic moment, a harbinger of the many sacrifices to come. The battlefield, once filled with the fierce roar of war, grew heavy with grief and vengeance. The day drew to a close, with blood staining the earth, and the warriors, though exhausted, knew that the true horrors of war had only just begun. The first day of battle had set. The tone there would be no mercy, no retreat. The Pandavas and Kauravas, each fueled by their own sense of justice, would continue their deadly dance until only one side remained. And in the midst of it all, the great question of fate, duty, and honor loomed over them all. The days following the first clash at Kurukshetra were filled with unrelenting violence and turmoil. The battlefield, once a vast expanse of dry earth, now soaked in blood, became the setting for the unfolding strategies of both the Pandavas and the Kauravas. Each day, the warriors fought with a ferocity born from years of animosity, knowing that only one side could emerge victorious. The sounds of battle echoed from sunrise to sunset conch shells, war cries, the clash of steel, and the groans of the fallen. The earth seemed to tremble under the weight of the conflict, as the dead and dying lay in heaps beneath the relentless advance of both armies. The Pandavas, though initially shaken by the sheer scale of the battle, began to find their rhythm. Bhima, with his towering strength, spearheaded the assault, his mace smashing through the Kaurava defences. Yet it was Arjuna, the unparalleled archer, who became the symbol of the Pandavas' hope. His deadly precision with the bow was unmatched, and his arrows rained down like a storm upon the Kaurava ranks. At his side, the brothers Nakula and Sahadeva proved to be a formidable force, cutting down warriors with swift and calculated strikes. The Pandavas, united in their purpose, relied on their discipline and loyalty to push back against the onslaught of the Kauravas. On the opposite side, the Kauravas, under the command of Bhishma, Dronacharya, and Karna, forged their own path of destruction. Bhishma, with his age and wisdom, led the charge with a quiet intensity, his shield unyielding against the Pandavas' onslaught. His position as the Kaurava commander made him an indomitable presence on the battlefield, his prowess unmatched by any of his adversaries. Dronacharya, the revered teacher, commanded his troops with ruthless efficiency, deploying strategies that made use of every soldier's strength. Karna, with his fiery spirit and unmatched archery skills, tore into the Pandava forces, his arrows finding their marks with deadly accuracy. As the days passed, both sides began to implement their respective strategies. The Pandavas focused on exploiting their superior agility and close-knit unit. They used coordinated attacks to isolate key Kaurava warriors and force them into retreat. Bhima's brutal charges disrupted the Kaurava ranks, while Arjuna's precision allowed for tactical strikes on key commanders. Meanwhile, the Kauravas relied on their seasoned veterans, Bhishma's unyielding defense, Dronacharya's disciplined formations, and Karna's relentless offense. Their strategy sought to wear down the Pandava forces, forcing them to break under the weight of the Kaurava might. In the chaos of these early days, the fate of the battlefield was uncertain. Each side had suffered losses, yet neither had gained a decisive advantage. The Pandavas' unity and determination began to shine, while the Kauravas' strength and experience continued to push back with devastating force. In these first days, the true cost of the war began to reveal its brothers lost, friends fallen, and the price of ambition weighed heavy on the hearts of those who fought. What had begun as a struggle for justice and honor had transformed into a brutal, relentless fight for survival. The battlefield stretched before them, and both sides knew the war had only just begun. As the war at Kurukshetra raged on, the figure of Bhishma stood like an immovable pillar among the Kaurava ranks. A warrior unmatched in strength and skill, his mere presence on the battlefield instilled both awe and fear. To the Kauravas, he was not only their commander, but a living legenda man whose name carried the weight of honor and duty. Yet despite his unmatched prowess, Bhishma was bound by a code that separated him from the other warriors of the war. Bhishma had once made an oath vow that bound his fate in ways even he could not escape. A vow of celibacy, a vow to never seek kingship, a vow to protect the throne of Hastinapura, regardless of the cost. This oath had shaped his life and made him a symbol of unwavering loyalty. But there was one more promise that had haunted Bhishma's conscience, one that now cast a shadow over his role in the war. He had sworn to never raise his hand against the Pandavas, his own grandnephews. This vow, born from a deep sense of duty to the Kuru dynasty, placed him in an impossible moral conflict, as the war demanded he fight not just for his family, but against it. Despite this oath, Bhishma fought with unmatched skill, his sword cleaving through the ranks of the Pandavas with unrelenting force. Yet, his heart was torn. In every strike he delivered, he knew he was bound by more than blood. He was bound by honor, and the weight of his promises weighed heavily on him. He never sought to kill the Pandavas, and as the war drew on, he found himself struggling to reconcile his duty to the Kauravas with his loyalty to his own family. In the chaos of the battle, he spared Arjuna when he could, avoiding lethal strikes despite the opportunity. His mind, however, was not at peace. Every moment of the battle was a reminder of the oath he had taken, a vow that made his heart heavy, knowing that to fight for one side meant abandoning the other. The Pandavas, though they fought fiercely, began to recognize Bhishma's internal struggle. There was an unspoken understanding between them. Arjuna, especially, felt a deep sense of respect and sorrow for Bhishma, knowing that the great warrior was not merely their enemy but also a man bound by duty and love for his family. Arjuna had long admired Bhishma, and the pain of seeing him caught in such a moral trap only deepened the burden of war. Bhishma's role was not that of a mere soldier. He was a tragic figure, a man who fought not for victory, but for the preservation of honor, no matter the cost. His valor on the battlefield was unquestioned, but his heart carried a burden that no warrior, no matter how great, could ever escape. The war was not just a battle for power, it was a battle for the soul of a family, and Bhishma's role in it would forever be marked by the internal struggle between duty and love. As the war continued to escalate, the Kauravas found themselves in need of a new leader, someone who could match Bhishma's brilliance in combat and inspire the troops to continue their relentless advance. The answer came in the form of Drona, a master of warfare and the martial arts, who had once been the teacher of both the Pandavas and the Kauravas. His reputation as a strategist and tactician was unmatched, and his knowledge of the art of war was revered by all. Drona's loyalty, however, was a complex matter, and it was here, on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, that his true conflict would come to the forefront. Drona had once been a revered teacher, imparting his wisdom to both the Pandavas and the Kauravas during their childhood. He had taught them the fundamentals of warfare, shaping them into the warriors they would become. In his heart, he had always seen both sets of princes as his disciples, and this connection to them weighed heavily on him as he prepared to lead the Kaurava army. He was bound by his duty to the throne of Hastinapura, and yet it was impossible to erase the memory of the years spent teaching his beloved students. Now, in this great conflict, he was forced to choose sides, and it pained him deeply to lead the very army that sought to destroy his own former pupils. On the battlefield, Drona led with precision and ruthlessness. His command was unquestioned, and his strategies turned the tide of battle in favor of the Kauravas on several occasions. Yet, the weight of his loyalty to the Kaurava crown was never far from his mind. The more he fought, the more he could feel the guilt gnawing at him for having to face the Pandavas, who had once been under his tutelage. He saw them as his children, his disciples, and yet here they were, standing on the opposite side of the battlefield, fighting for the kingdom that was rightfully theirs. As the war progressed, Drona's internal conflict grew more intense. His relationship with Arjuna, in particular, was fraught with emotional turmoil. Arjuna had been his star pupil, the one who had surpassed all others in skill and devotion. Drona had seen greatness in Arjuna from the very beginning, and yet, here he was, the teacher forced to fight against his most beloved student. His heart ached every time he locked eyes with Arjuna across the battlefield, knowing the pain that each strike brought them both. Drona's leadership was marked by a deep, unspoken sorrow that came from the impossible position he had found himself in. His honor and his duty as a commander demanded that he lead the Kaurava forces to victory. Yet his personal feelings, his love for his students, held him back in ways that only he truly understood. It was a leadership marked not only by brilliance and strategy, but by the unbearable weight of the choices he had made and the ties he had once forged with both sides of the war. The battle on the 13th day of the war was marked by the tragic death of Abhimanyu, the valiant son of Arjuna, whose fate became a symbol of both heroism and brutal injustice. Abhimanyu was young, barely a teenager, but his bravery and skill on the battlefield surpassed even the greatest of warriors. He had been trained in the arts of warfare from a young age, learning not only the techniques of battle, but also the strategies and secrets that would make him an invaluable asset in the war. Yet, it was his courage and youthful determination that would ultimately seal his fate. The Kauravas, led by Drona, had devised a complex battle formation known as the Chakravyuha, a circular array of troops that could only be broken by someone with the skill to navigate its intricate defenses. Abhimanyu, having learned the art of breaking the Chakravyuha from his father, Arjuna, knew of the formation's secrets, but had never been allowed to complete his training. Arjuna had been forced to leave the battlefield on that fateful day, leaving his son to lead the charge against the Kauravas. His companions, the Pandavas, and their allies, unaware of the dangers ahead, sent Abhimanyu into the heart of the battle. Unaware of the trap that awaited him, Abhimanyu entered the Chakravyuha with the same fierce determination that had always characterized his spirit. With his bow drawn and his arrows flying, he pierced through the outer layers of the formation, breaking through the defenses with an intensity that stunned even the most seasoned warriors. For a time, it seemed as though nothing could stop him. His skill was unparalleled, and the enemies before him faltered under his might. However, the situation soon turned grim. As Abhimanyu pressed forward, the Kaurava forces closed in on him, and the gates of the formation were sealed shut behind him. Trapped in a battle with no way out, the young warrior was surrounded. The Kaurava warriors, knowing that they had no equal in Abhimanyu, resorted to treachery. Drona, Karna, and the other commanders, while admiring the young prince's valor, began to close in on him mercilessly. What followed was a horrifying assault, a violation of the rules of warfare. Abhimanyu was surrounded, wounded, and outnumbered. Despite fighting with unmatched bravery, he was no match for the combined forces that encircled him. He was struck down in a vicious attack, with no chance to escape the trap that had been set for him. His death reverberated throughout the battlefield, a tragic blow to the Pandavas. Arjuna's heart shattered when he learned of his son's fate, and his grief was matched only by his rage. The death of Abhimanyu not only deepened the hatred between the Pandavas and Kauravas, but also marked a turning point in the war, for it was a reminder of the ruthless nature of the conflict and the price that would be paid for ambition and power. Abhimanyu's death became a symbol of youthful sacrifice, his courage etched in the hearts of all who witnessed the horror that unfolded that day. The fall of Bhishma, the great Kaurava commander, was a moment steeped in sorrow and tragedy, a turning point in the war that would change the course of the battle forever. Bhishma, the eldest of the Kauravas, had fought valiantly for his family, bound by an oath of loyalty to his blind brother, King Dhritarashtra, and the Kaurava cause. His honor and valor were unmatched, and he had proven to be an indomitable force on the battlefield. Yet, his loyalties, noble as they were, could not shield him from the relentless tide of fate that was sweeping over the Kurukshetra war. For days, Bhishma had stood as a wall of steel, holding back the Pandavas with his unmatched skill in battle. His weapons were like lightning, and his defense seemed unbreakable. He had sworn an oath never to kill the Pandavas, and though he fought with all his might, he restrained himself from delivering fatal blows to them. His commitment to his vows created an internal conflict within him, for he could not bring himself to kill his beloved family, even as they fought against him. But his refusal to fight with full force meant he was slowing the inevitable, prolonging the war and the bloodshed. The Pandavas, with Krishna's guidance, had long sought a way to defeat Bhishma, knowing that as long as he remained on the battlefield, victory would remain elusive. Krishna, the divine strategist, devised a plan that would finally bring the great warrior down. Krishna knew that Bhishma, though invincible in many respects, had one vulnerability: his will to live. Bhishma had taken a vow of celibacy and renunciation, and he had also sworn that he would not fight against his loved ones. With this in mind, Krishna instructed the Pandavas to target Bhishma's will to live, rather than his formidable combat skills. On the 10th day of the war, when the fighting was at its fiercest, the Pandavas, with the help of their allies, launched a calculated assault. Arjuna, who had always been a master archer, was guided by Krishna's wisdom as he carefully placed arrows into Bhishma's body, strategically piercing him in such a way that Bhishma could no longer continue fighting. With each arrow that struck him, Bhishma's body became a testament to his unyielding valor, but his soul began to falter. He knew that he had fulfilled his duty as a warrior, yet the burden of his vows and his inability to end the war weighed heavily on him. As Bhishma fell to the ground, his body covered in arrows, he gazed at the sky with quiet acceptance. He did not feel anger or despair. Instead, he was resigned to the fate he had long known was inevitable. His fall was both heroic and tragic. It was a moment of immense honor for the Pandavas, for they had succeeded in breaking the Kaurava stronghold, but it was also a moment of deep sorrow, for Bhishma had been a revered figure, one whose life had been marked by sacrifice and duty. He fell not with a cry of defiance, but with the calm dignity of one who had lived by his word and was ready to embrace the final consequence of his choices. The battlefield fell silent as Bhishma lay in his deathbed of arrows, and even the Kauravas, who had witnessed his valor firsthand, could only look on in sorrow. Bhishma, who had been the pillar of their strength, was gone, leaving a void that could never be filled. His fall marked a crucial victory for the Pandavas, but it was a victory that was bitter to taste, for no warrior could truly rejoice in the death of such a noble figure. Drona's death was a moment marked by both treachery and sorrow, the result of a cruel deception that shattered the heart of one of the greatest warriors of the war. Drona, the revered teacher of both the Pandavas and the Kauravas, had trained many of the war's most skilled fighters. His loyalty to the Kaurava cause was unshakable, and he had fought with honor throughout the conflict. But in the end, it was his love for his son, Ashwatthama, that proved to be his undoing. For many days, Drona fought with unmatched valor, his every move guided by years of wisdom and experience. But the war had taken its toll, and despite his strength, the Kaurava forces began to feel the crushing weight of defeat. In the face of impending loss, the Pandavas, desperate to break Drona's resolve, devised a plan that would exploit the one thing they knew could shatter his will to fight: his love for Ashwatthama. The Pandavas, aided by Krishna's guidance, spread the news that Ashwatthama had been slain in battle. The moment was carefully orchestrated, a cruel lie told with the sole purpose of breaking Drona's spirit. The news was relayed in such a way that it seemed undeniable. Ashwatthama, Drona's beloved son, was gone. The news spread quickly, and Drona, overwhelmed with grief, momentarily lost the clarity that had kept him a step ahead of the enemy for so long. In that moment of anguish, Drona's resolve began to weaken. He dropped his weapons, his eyes clouded with sorrow, and he lost the will to fight. His focus shifted away from the battle as his heart broke at the loss of his son. As he stood, devastated by the false news, the Pandavas saw their chance. Yudhishthira, the eldest Pandava, approached Drona under the guise of offering a final prayer and support, but his words were laced with cunning. Yudhishthira, ever the dharmic ruler, declared the truth in a way that Drona could no longer ignore. The death of his son was the lie that had led to his undoing. Without the clarity of purpose that had once driven him, Drona's defenses crumbled. In his weakened state, Drishtadyumna, the son of Drupada and a key figure in the Pandava army, seized the opportunity. With a single stroke, Drona, the mighty teacher, the unyielding warrior, fell to the ground, his life extinguished by a blow that had been guided not by honor but by necessity. The death of Drona echoed across the battlefield, leaving both the Kauravas and Pandavas to reflect on the tragic turn of events. The moment was one of bitter triumph for the Pandavas, for while they had lost their teacher and mentor to his own grief, the war had claimed another hero. For Drona, death came not from the weapons of his enemies, but from the deepest wound of all, the loss of a beloved child. The battlefield, once filled with the clashing of swords and the roar of warriors, fell silent in the wake of his demise. Each soul on the field haunted by the knowledge that even the mightiest could fall to the ravages of sorrow and betrayal. Karna's loyalty was a force that defined him, and yet it was also the very thing that led to his tragic downfall. A warrior unmatched in skill and courage, Karna stood as one of the Kauravas' greatest champions. But his story was not one of simple allegiance. Beneath the surface of his undying loyalty to Duryodhana, his heart carried the weight of many unspoken truths, and his mind struggled with an internal conflict that shaped every step he took on the battlefield. Born to Kunti, the mother of the Pandavas, Karna's true identity remained hidden from him for most of his life. His birth was the result of a secret union between Kunti and the sun god, Surya, before her marriage to King Pandu. When Kunti, faced with the stigma of an unwed mother, abandoned her son, Karna was raised by a humble charioteer and his wife. Despite the noble blood that ran through his veins, Karna was unaware of his heritage. He grew up with a fierce determination to prove his worth, especially in a world where his lowly upbringing worked against him. Karna's path would eventually cross with Duryodhana, the eldest of the Kauravas. The bond between them was forged in the fires of shared adversity. Duryodhana, ever jealous of the Pandavas and desperate for a worthy ally, saw in Karna a warrior of unparalleled potential. When Karna was publicly humiliated in a competition by Arjuna, Duryodhana, struck by both the injustice of it and Karna's unyielding spirit, made him a king and pledged his unbreakable support. In that moment, Duryodhana's loyalty was returned in kind. Karna swore himself to the Kaurava cause, his allegiance to Duryodhana sealing his fate in ways he could never have foreseen. Yet, for all his loyalty, Karna was a man torn by inner conflict. His heart often swayed between his duty to Duryodhana and the knowledge that he was, by blood, a son of Kunti, a brother to the Pandavas. The truth of his origins remained a bitter secret that gnawed at him, especially as the war escalated. He had grown to love Duryodhana as a friend and a brother, but the loyalty he felt towards him was not without its cost. Karna knew the Pandavas were his true family, yet his pride, his sense of honor, and his unwavering commitment to the man who had given him both respect and purpose kept him from defecting. As the battle raged on, Karna's struggle only deepened. He fought with valor, but his actions were always tempered by the agony of knowing that he was caught between two worlds. His heart ached for the brothers he could never claim, and yet he knew that his loyalty to Duryodhana was a bond he could not break. It was this internal conflict that added tragedy to every blow he struck, every life he took, for Karna's fate was written not by his sword, but by the unrelenting grip of his loyalty to a man who, in the end, could not give him the peace he so desperately sought. In the final moments of his life, when he faced Arjuna on the battlefield, Karna's loyalty had already sealed his doom. His tragic fate was inevitable, for he had long since sacrificed his own happiness, his own sense of self, for a loyalty that would never allow him the peace he craved. Karna died a hero, but it was a hero whose heart had been forever divided between love and duty, between brotherhood and honor, and between a past he could not change and a future he could not escape. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a red glow over the battlefield, as Karna and Arjuna faced one another in the final, inevitable clash. The two warriors, once brothers in arms, now stood on opposite sides, their destinies sealed by fate and loyalty. Karna's armor, which had once protected him like a shield forged by the gods, had been stripped away, leaving him vulnerable. Arjuna, guided by Krishna, his charioteer, stood ready to end what had begun long ago, but the air was thick with sorrow. For Karna, the battle was not just a fight for survival, but a final, painful reckoning with the truth he had long hidden from the world. Karna's body, battered by the fierce assaults of the war, bore the marks of his sacrifices. He had given everything to his friendship with Duryodhana, even as he stood on the brink of self-destruction. It was his loyalty to Duryodhana, the man who had raised him from the depths of obscurity, that had led him to this moment. His true heritage, his birthright as the son of Kunti, remained a cruel secret until the very end. He had fought valiantly, never hesitating, always pushing forward with the weight of his promises to his friend. As the final battle with Arjuna raged on, Karna's inner turmoil reached its peak. His heart, torn between his love for Duryodhana and the truth of his origins, could not find peace. But in that moment of impending death, when his chariot wheel sank into the earth, Karna's fate was sealed. He was no longer the warrior who stood invincible in battle, but a man forced to confront the consequences of his choices. It was in that moment of vulnerability that Arjuna, following Krishna's command, struck down the man who had been his brother in all but blood. Karna fell to the earth, his life slipping away with the wind. But even as he lay dying, his thoughts were not of revenge or anger, but of his loyalty to Duryodhana. He had lived his life in service to his friend, and he would die with the same commitment. There was no regret in his heart for the choice he had made, only an acceptance of the path he had walked. In his final moments, Karna found the release he had sought for so long, a release, not in victory, but in the surrender of his soul to the cosmic balance of Dharma. As Karna's life faded away, Krishna, ever the orchestrator of fate, revealed the truth to Arjuna. Karna was not the son of a lowly charioteer, but the eldest son of Kunti, a brother to the Pandavas. The revelation came too late, and Arjuna could not reconcile the brother he had slain with the man he had fought against. Karna had died for a cause that would never truly be his, but in that final sacrifice, he found his place in the grand narrative of the war. His death was not a loss, but a fulfillment of his loyalty, his honor, and his inevitable fate. The battlefield of Kurukshetra had seen the rise and fall of countless warriors, but none had been as relentless, as driven, as Duryodhana. His ambition, his thirst for power, and his unwavering belief in his own right to rule had carried him through each day of the war. Even as his brothers and allies fell one by one, Duryodhana stood tall, refusing to bow, refusing to surrender. But all of it, every moment of his unyielding pride, was leading to this final confrontation with Bhima, the Pandava who had long sworn revenge for the death of his kin. The clash between Duryodhana and Bhima had been set in motion by years of hatred, jealousy, and the bitter truth that neither could ever truly back down. Duryodhana, filled with the poison of his arrogance, was relentless in his pursuit of victory. Bhima, fueled by his vows, met him with a fury that could not be quenched. The two were bound not only by their enmity, but by the tragedy of a war that would forever scar both families. Their battle was not just the culmination of the Kurukshetra war, but the final reckoning between two forces that had been colliding for lifetimes. As the two giants of the battlefield faced one another, the air seemed to crackle with tension. Duryodhana, though a formidable warrior, was wearied by the war's toll. His strength had been tested to its limits, and though he fought with the passion of a man who had nothing left to lose, his body betrayed him. Bhima, on the other hand, had only grown stronger with each passing day. His muscles, honed through years of intense training and driven by the weight of his personal loss, seemed to burst with power as he met Duryodhana's blows. the battle raged on, each strike between the two sending tremors through the earth, but there was no turning back. Bhima, with his mind set on vengeance, remembered the humiliating moment in the past when Duryodhana had mocked him, breaking his pride and his body in that fateful dice game. Every blow he struck carried the weight of that humiliation, the years of suffering, and the pain of his fallen brothers. With each swing of his mace, Bhima's anger became the strength that shattered Duryodhana's defenses. Finally, it came to a point where Duryodhana, his body bruised and broken, found himself on the ground. The earth beneath him trembled as Bhima, towering over his fallen foe, lifted his mace for the final blow. Duryodhana, defeated and humbled, pleaded for mercy, but there was none to be found. Bhima's mace came crashing down, and with it, Duryodhana's life was extinguished. The death of Duryodhana was not just a victory for the Pandavas, it was the tragic end of a soul that had been consumed by the very pride that had driven him to this point. As Bhima stood over his fallen foe, the symbolic weight of the moment hung heavy in the air. The battle was won, but at what cost? The war had taken everything. Both sides had lost too much, and even in victory, there was no true triumph. The land of Kurukshetra, soaked with blood, would never again be the same. The dust of the battlefield had settled, but the weight of the Kurukshetra war lingered like a dark cloud over the land. The cries of dying warriors had faded into a haunting silence, broken only by the winds that swept across the scorched earth. The Pandavas stood victorious, yet the victory felt hollow, like the fragile remains of a once great dream. The war that had torn their world apart had come to an end, but the cost was immeasurable. Brothers, friends, and countless soldiers had been lost in the blood-soaked battlefields, and the legacy of this war would haunt generations to come. Yudhishthira, the eldest Pandava, stood solemnly at the edge of the battlefield, his heart heavy with the weight of all that had transpired. He had fought for justice, for the right to reclaim what was his, but now that the war was over, he was left with only sorrow. The victories were meaningless in the face of the deaths that had been caused. The kingdom that was once theirs had been reclaimed, but in the process, they had lost everything that truly mattered. The Pandavas had gained the throne, but the cost had been too high. Arjuna, his bow now silent and his body bloodied, looked around at the devastation. He had fought with valor, as had his brothers, but there was no celebration in his eyes. The destruction around them, the bodies of loved ones and enemies alike, had extinguished any sense of triumph. The echo of their enemies' final breaths still rang in his ears, and the realization settled deep within his soul. What had been won could never replace what had been lost. The cries of the innocent lingered in the shadows, unspoken but ever present. Bhima, who had long sought revenge for the humiliation of his family, found himself standing alone in the aftermath of the war. His great strength, which had once been his pride, now felt like a burden. He had struck down the foes that had hurt them, yet in the end, it was his own people who had been destroyed. What was the purpose of such might if it led only to this ruin? He felt no satisfaction, no pride, just an overwhelming emptiness that gripped his heart. The Pandavas had been crowned as kings once more, but their reign would not be one of celebration. They ruled over a kingdom that had been reduced to ashes, a land that would take generations to heal. The people they had once ruled with joy now lay shattered, broken by the very conflict they had sought to end. The war was over, but the journey had just begun. The Pandavas would now face the task of rebuilding not just the land, but their souls. For they too had been scarred in ways far deeper than any battlefield wound. As Yudhishthira ascended to the throne, he could not help but feel that the true battle had only just begun. The world around him had changed, and he knew that his kingship would be marked by a heavy burden. He had won the war, but at what cost? The end of the war brought no peace, only a world forever altered by the choices that had been made on that fateful battlefield. The war had ended, but its echoes reverberated through every corner of the land. And the Pandavas, despite their victory, found no joy in the silence that followed. The battlefield, that had once been filled with the sounds of clashing weapons and war cries, was now eerily still, a graveyard of the lives that had been extinguished. The Pandavas had reclaimed their kingdom, but what had they truly won? The cost of the war was far greater than they had ever imagined, and as the dust of battle settled, the weight of their actions began to sink in. Yudhishthira, the eldest, stood alone at the edge of the battlefield, gazing at the carnage. The thought of his victory felt hollow. He had fought for justice, for the right to reclaim his kingdom, but the bloodshed that accompanied it was something that could never be undone. So many had died, brothers, teachers, friends. His heart ached for the countless souls who had been lost in the name of duty, for the lives that had been shattered in pursuit of power and righteousness. He could hear the voices of the fallen, their cries of agony and despair lingering in the air like a haunting melody. He had won the kingdom, but what kind of ruler could he be in a world so broken? Arjuna, too, struggled with the aftermath. He had faced his own demons on the battlefield, wielding his bow with unyielding precision, yet now he could only stare at the broken bodies of his foes, many of whom were once his relatives, his friends. The weight of his arrows, which had once felt so light in his hands, now felt like an unbearable burden. He had killed to protect his family, to restore their honor, but the faces of the fallen haunted him, and the righteousness of his cause seemed less certain with each passing day. What had he truly accomplished? What had the bloodshed given them, except for more bloodshed? Bhima, whose strength had been the mightiest on the battlefield, now felt as though his power had been diminished. He had struck down their enemies, his massive fists delivering justice with each blow, but the anger that had driven him seemed empty now. He had sought vengeance for his family's suffering, yet the victory left him feeling unfulfilled, disconnected from the pride he had once felt. His strength, once a source of immense pride, now seemed only a reminder of the destruction it had caused. The kingdom they had won lay in ruins, as the once vibrant cities now stood in silent mourning. The people, who had long awaited the return of their rightful rulers, could not celebrate. They had witnessed the devastation of their land, the destruction of their homes, and the loss of so many lives. The Pandavas stood as rulers of a kingdom, but they were not triumphant. They were bereft of the peace they had so desperately sought. The war had taken everything from them: hope, joy, and the innocent lives they had fought to protect. The aftermath of the war would linger far longer than any of the battles fought upon the field. The Pandavas had emerged victorious, but they were scarred in ways deeper than any wound. The kingdom had been restored, but the price was too high, and the moral cost of their victory weighed heavily upon them. What they had gained seemed insignificant in the face of what had been lost. The day of Yudhishthira's coronation arrived, but there was no joy in the celebration. The grand ceremonies that marked his ascension to the throne felt like empty ritual. The people of Hastinapura gathered in the great hall, their faces a mixture of respect and sorrow, their hearts still heavy with the loss of so many lives. Yudhishthira, once eager to reclaim his birthright, now stood before his subjects with a heart burdened by the weight of the war he had fought and the kingdom he had won. As the crown was placed upon his head, there was no spark of victory in his eyes, only a deep, unshakable weariness. The once proud and resolute king-to-be was now a man searching for meaning, wondering if there was any true purpose in the throne he had inherited. He looked out across the gathered nobles, his gaze lingering on the faces of those who had supported him throughout the war. Their eyes gleamed with pride, but Yudhishthira could not share in their enthusiasm. All he saw in their faces were the ghosts of the dead, the countless lives lost in the name of ambition and justice. Yudhishthira's mind wandered back to the battlefields, the cries of the dying, the thundering sound of chariots and weapons crashing together. He had fought for the right to rule, to restore his family's honor. Yet now that it was all over, the truth weighed heavily on his soul. What was the true cost of victory? What had he really gained? The kingdom lay in ruins. The people were scarred. and he stood as a king with no one to truly rule. Power had seemed so necessary in the face of the Kauravas' betrayal, but now that he had it, it felt hollow. As he sat upon the throne, the weight of it became unbearable. The lavish courtiers and counselors who once eagerly awaited his commands now seemed like distant shadows. They celebrated his coronation, but their voices were mere murmurs in his ears. Yudhishthira looked into the distance, as if searching for the answers to the questions that had begun to take root in his heart. What good was a crown when it had been earned at such a tremendous cost? What was the meaning of power when it had only brought pain and destruction? The kingdom he had regained was a kingdom of ghosts, haunted by the memory of the warriors who had fought and died, and by the realization that their blood had been spilled for something he could no longer fully understand. In the solitude of his throne room, Yudhishthira reflected on his past decisions. He remembered the teachings of his elders, the wisdom of the great sage Vyasa, and the counsel of his brothers, but none of it seemed to offer him solace now. He had asked for a kingdom, but now that it was in his hands, he felt as though he had been given a burden instead of a blessing. The weight of his crown was a weight that would follow him for the rest of his days, a constant reminder of the war that had changed everything, and of the futility that now seemed to permeate all that had been fought for. As Yudhishthira sat upon his throne, the kingdom slowly returning to a semblance of order, a sense of emptiness continued to weigh upon him. He had been crowned, but the victories felt distant, the triumphs of the battlefield slipping into the shadows of his thoughts. His gaze often wandered to the horizon, as if searching for something, someone who had been by his side through every trial, every moment of pain and victory. Krishna, the divine figure, friend and mentor who had guided the Pandavas with unwavering wisdom and support, was now preparing to leave. Krishna had always been more than a mere ally. He had been a guiding light, a deity who had walked among them as an equal, offering counsel in times of despair, lifting their spirits when defeat seemed inevitable, and revealing the truths of life and duty that had shaped their journey. From the moment he had stepped onto the battlefield of Kurukshetra, Krishna had never wavered in his commitment to the Pandavas. But as the war ended and the dust of the battlefield settled, his time in the mortal realm was drawing to a close. The Pandavas gathered around Krishna, their hearts heavy with a sorrow they could not express. The man who had been their guide, their protector, their very beacon of hope, was ready to return to his divine abode, his purpose on earth fulfilled. It was not a departure that could be prevented, nor one that could be delayed. Krishna's role, as both a mediator between the mortal and divine realms, had reached its conclusion. His earthly mission was over. The time had come for him to leave behind the kingdom of men and return to his true form, to the heavens, where his divine essence would once again merge with the cosmos. Krishna stood before the Pandavas, a calm smile upon his face, though his eyes held a deep, eternal understanding. He had known this moment was coming, for the balance of life and death, of creation and destruction, was a cycle that he had helped shape. The Pandavas, despite their sorrow, knew that his departure was as inevitable as the setting sun. But it did not make the parting any easier. Yudhishthira, his heart torn between duty and grief, approached Krishna, unable to hold back the tears. "Krishna," he whispered, his voice trembling, "how can we go on without you? You have been our guide, our strength. Without you, what is left for us?" Krishna placed a hand on Yudhishthira's shoulder, his touch as warm as it was comforting. "The path you walk now is your own, my friend. I have given you the wisdom, the strength, and the guidance you need. It is up to you to carry it forward, to lead with the same justice and honor that you have always strived for. Know this, Yudhishthira, I will always be with you, in spirit." The journey does not end here, and with those final words, Krishna departed from the mortal realm, leaving behind a world that had been irrevocably changed by his presence. The Pandavas, though filled with sorrow at his loss, now carried within them the lessons he had imparted, lessons that would continue to guide them long after his departure. Krishna's departure was not an end, but a new beginning one, where the Pandavas would have to stand on their own, their hearts forever tethered to the divine, but their steps now guided by the wisdom Krishna had left behind. Yudhishthira, though crowned as the king, was burdened by a weight that no crown could relieve. The throne of Hastinapura, once a symbol of his triumph, now felt like a cold, empty seat, a place where the echoes of the fallen still reverberated. The war, which he had fought so hard to reclaim his birthright, had left him with a soul heavy with guilt. His brothers, his people, had seen victory, but all Yudhishthira could feel was the deep, gnawing emptiness in his heart. The images of the battlefield haunted him, the bodies of his kin, the bloodshed that had stained the earth, the lives that had been lost at his command. Each death seemed to carry a weight he could not cast aside. He had followed the path of Dharma, but the cost had been too high. Was this truly the path of righteousness? Was the throne worth the sorrow of seeing the faces of the dead in his dreams? The more Yudhishthira reflected on the war and its consequences, the more the guilt festered within him. His conscience, once a steady guide, now felt like an insurmountable force pushing him toward despair. Days turned to weeks, and Yudhishthira withdrew into himself. He could not shake the feeling that the world he had fought for had become a hollow victory. The grand halls of his palace, filled with celebrations and gratitude from his people, now felt suffocating. The echo of laughter in the chambers felt like a cruel reminder of all that had been lost. He had never wanted a throne. He had never desired to rule over a land soaked in blood. What he longed for now was peace for himself, for his brothers, for the spirits of those who had fallen in the war. One evening, as the moonlight bathed the palace in silver, Yudhishthira sought the guidance of a sage who had once offered him counsel during the dark days of exile. The sage, an embodiment of wisdom, saw the turmoil in Yudhishthira's eyes before the king even spoke a word. "What weighs upon you, my son?" the sage asked, his voice as gentle as the evening breeze. "I have done what I thought was right," Yudhishthira replied, his voice broken. "But the cost is too great. The lives of so many, my own kin. I feel responsible for every soul lost on the battlefield. How do I find peace when I have caused so much suffering?" The sage regarded him with a knowing gaze, his eyes reflecting the quiet understanding of one who had seen countless rulers struggle with their own burdens of power and guilt. "The path to redemption, Yudhishthira, is not through running from your actions, but through facing them. You are not the first to carry such weight, nor will you be the last. Redemption comes through introspection, humility, and a dedication to serving the greater good." Yudhishthira closed his eyes, and for the first time since the war's end, he felt a small flicker of hope. The sage had spoken of peace, not as something to be found, but something to be earned through a life of righteousness and service to others. Slowly, the weight on his chest began to ease. There was no immediate solace, no magic cure for the wounds of his soul, but there was a way forward. In the days that followed, Yudhishthira began his spiritual journey toward redemption, dedicating himself to the welfare of his people and the principles of Dharma that Krishna had taught him. He ruled with compassion and wisdom, knowing that peace would not be a reward, but something he must earn with every decision, every action, every day. The guilt remained, but it no longer paralyzed him. Instead, it drove him toward a greater understanding of his place in the world, a journey of atonement and growth that would, in time, bring him the peace he so desperately sought. The time had come for the Pandavas to relinquish everything they had fought for. The burdens of the throne, the weight of the war, and the sorrow that had settled in their hearts all pointed them toward the same conclusion. Their journey in the world of rulers was over. The kingdom they had reclaimed, the lands they had won with blood, now felt like fleeting illusions. Their bodies had endured the wounds of battle, but it was their souls that needed healing. So, they made a decision that no one expected the Pandavas would abandon their kingdom and embark on a final pilgrimage, seeking a journey not of power, but of redemption. It was Yudhishthira, the eldest, who spoke the words that echoed through their hearts. The kingdom is not ours to keep. We have been mere instruments in a greater plan. Let us leave all that we have known behind and walk the path of truth, seeking peace, not for ourselves, but for the world. And so they set out, leaving behind their people, their palaces, and the lands they had ruled. The road before them was long, winding, and uncertain. The world they walked through now seemed both familiar and foreign, a reminder of their past glories and their profound losses. With Krishna's teachings still fresh in their minds, they travelled across the breadth of India, seeking not material gains, but spiritual peace. Along the way, they visited sacred place temples, forests, mountains where they meditated on the lessons of dharma, karma, and the impermanence of life. They encountered hermits and sages who spoke to them of the ultimate purpose of life, the journey of the soul, and its liberation from the cycles of birth and death. Each place they visited offered them wisdom, a new perspective on their past, and a deeper understanding of the world's transient nature. They came to realize that power and possession were mere distractions, temporary clouds that obscured the clear sky of truth. The Pandavas' hearts lightened with each lesson they learned, each prayer they offered, and each step they took towards self-realization. Yet the path was not without its trials. The ghosts of the past memories of the battle, the betrayals, the grief often visited them. Each brother had to confront his own share of sorrow, regret, and longing. Arjuna, the mighty archer, reflected on the lives he had taken, and the bond he had with his brothers was tested by the weight of their shared history. Bhima, who had crushed many in battle, wrestled with the violence he had brought upon the world. Nakula and Sahadeva, the twins, questioned their role in a war that had torn their world apart. Through it all, the brothers leaned on one another, finding strength in their unity. Their pilgrimage was not just a physical journey, but a spiritual one, a final attempt to find peace, to come to terms with their past, and to seek ultimate liberation. As they moved forward, they realized that the greatest journey was not across the land, but within themselves, and in that realization, they understood the true meaning of freedom. It was not the throne or the victory that mattered, but the quiet peace that could be found only when the soul is freed from the weight of the world. This pilgrimage was their final act, a testament to their faith and their desire for a deeper truth that transcended the mortal realm. The Pandavas, once mighty kings, now walked humbly on a path of redemption, seeking the quiet peace that awaited them at the end of their long journey. As the Pandavas continued their final journey across the land, their hearts heavy with the weight of the past, each step drew them closer to the end. It was not just the end of their earthly journey, but the culmination of their lives, their quest for redemption, for release from the burdens of their actions, and for the liberation of their souls. The path they walked was not one of mere pilgrimage, but one that led to the ultimate truth. Their journey was guided by an inner light, yet the end was inevitable, for death was always at the horizon. It was Yudhishthira, the eldest and wisest, who first felt the pull of the end. His body, once a symbol of strength and leadership, began to grow frail. The weight of the kingdom, of the war, of the countless lives lost, had taken its toll on him. As he neared the final stretch of their pilgrimage, his spirit, which had always been strong in its pursuit of Dharma, began to soften, and he could feel the approaching presence of death. He had fulfilled his duty as king, as a son, as a brother. Yet now, standing before the threshold of salvation, he could not deny the inevitable. Yudhishthira's death was peaceful, a quiet surrender to the divine order. The burden of his reign, his choices, and his sense of duty melted away, leaving only a man who had lived according to his principles. He had always sought to do what was right, even when it was painful. His passing marked the beginning of the end for the Pandavas, for his journey was the first to conclude. The earth, which had once trembled at his footsteps, now remained still, honoring the wisdom and the suffering of the man who had carried so much on his shoulders. With Yudhishthira's passing, the brothers continued, each facing their own mortality. The death of each Pandava was a moment of profound realization. They did not die in battle, nor did they fall in the pursuit of power. They died in the pursuit of salvation. Each brother's death came in the natural course of their journey, a gentle reminder that life and death are but two sides of the same coin, inseparable and eternal. Bhima, who had once struck down many with his immense strength, fell next. His death came not as a result of battle, but in quiet reflection. As he lay to rest, Bhima realized that the true strength he had long sought was not in his muscles, but in his ability to surrender his will to the divine. His strength was now internal, no longer defined by his physical prowess, but by his acceptance of the cycles of life and death. Arjuna, the greatest of warriors, soon followed. His death, too, was peaceful. Arjuna had once fought for glory, for revenge, for justice. But now, in the stillness of his passing, he understood that all battles, external or internal, were part of a larger divine plan. His heroic deeds faded into the quiet whisper of the eternal truth. Nakula and Sahadeva, the twins who had always stood by each other, died together, their journey marked by their devotion to one another and their shared sense of duty. They had once fought together on the battlefield, but now they journeyed together into the unknown, as their souls merged with the universal truth. Their deaths were not tragic, but rather the fulfillment of a cycle, a return to the divine that had always been their destiny. As each Pandava passed, the air grew still, as if the universe itself was honoring them. They had lived their lives with righteousness, and now they would return to the divine source from which they came, their souls finally freed from the weight of their mortal existence. Their journey, though filled with pain, sacrifice, and loss, had brought them to the ultimate peace, the realization of oneness with the cosmos. As the Pandavas reached the final stages of their journey, a serene and profound silence enveloped them. The land had changed. The air was thick with the weight of transcendence. They had left the earthly realm far behind, and ahead of them lay an unseen destination, one that had long been foretold but never fully understood. Their pilgrimage, which had begun with the loss of the kingdom and the echoes of war, now reached its culmination. The path before them was not of this world, but led to the very gates of the eternal. One by one, they felt the pull of the divine, a call that transcended their mortal existence. The sky above shimmered with a golden light, and the earth beneath them seemed to dissolve into the vastness of the cosmos. The Pandavas, those once powerful rulers, now walked not as kings or warriors, but as souls on the brink of liberation. Their journey was no longer defined by the trials they had faced, but by the understanding that the cycles of life and death were simply part of the greater cosmic dance. Yudhishthira, having walked the longest path of the five, took the first step towards the final ascent. His heart, heavy with the burden of his past choices, had found solace in the realization that righteousness had guided him, even in his most uncertain moments. The pain of the war, the devastation of his kingdom, and the loss of his loved ones now felt distant, as if they were echoes from another life. As he ascended, a radiant figure appeared before him, his father, King Dhritarashtra, waiting with open arms. Their reunion was not one of grief, but of understanding. There was no judgment in the embrace, only acceptance. Yudhishthira had come to see that all paths, no matter how fraught with suffering, ultimately lead to divine unity. The others followed, each encountering their own journey's end. Bhima, who had once sought strength in battle, now felt a different kind of strength, the strength of surrender. Arjuna, whose arrows had once flown through the air in pursuit of justice, now understood that true victory was not in conquest, but in transcending the very need for conflict. Nakula and Sahadeva, the twins whose bond had been their greatest strength, found themselves united in spirit as they crossed into the realm beyond. They were not separated by the battles they had fought or the victories they had achieved, but were unified in the eternal truth that binds all beings. As they ascended together, the Pandavas found themselves in the company of their ancestors, those who had lived before them, and those who would come after. The world they had once known, the wars, the alliances, the betrayals faded into the background, replaced by the overwhelming presence of divine consciousness. The Mahabharata, with its tale of duty, sacrifice, and redemption, had brought them here, to the realization that all life is but a reflection of the infinite. Their final moments were not a conclusion, but a return to the source from which all things arise. The spiritual message of the Mahabharata had always been clear: the struggle between good and evil, the pursuit of Dharma, and the quest for peace are all part of the eternal cycle of life. The Pandavas, having lived their lives with honor, had now returned to the divine, their journey having fulfilled its purpose. They had transcended the dualities of life and death, victory and defeat, and had united with the very essence of existence itself. Yudhishthira, the eldest Pandava, had always been a figure defined by his unshakable commitment to Dharma righteousness that governs the universe. Even in the face of unimaginable loss, betrayal, and the bloodshed of war, he had held steadfast to his principles, never swerving from the path of justice. His every decision, no matter how painful, had been made with the intention of fulfilling his duty as a ruler, a brother, and a son. Yet, as he approached the final stages of his journey, Yudhishthira was confronted by the greatest test of all: to stand before the very embodiment of Dharma itself and face a choice that would define his fate. As the Pandavas began their final pilgrimage towards heaven, Yudhishthira felt a quiet foreboding in his heart, an unspoken sense of the weight that still hung over him. He had witnessed the destruction of his kin, the fall of his kingdom, and the unraveling of a world he had once hoped to protect. Yet in all his grief, his devotion to Dharma had remained his guiding star. His path had not been easy. Dharma never promised comfort, only the fulfillment of one's duties in the face of trials. But now, standing on the edge of the mortal realm, he found himself standing at the precipice of an ultimate question. Before him appeared the god of Dharma, Yudhishthira's father, Yama. With the quiet wisdom of one who had observed his son's journey, Yama spoke, his voice like thunder in the stillness of the world. "You have lived according to Dharma, Yudhishthira. Yet, now you must prove your worth in the final test. You must abandon all worldly attachments and show that your commitment to righteousness transcends even the love of your family and the ties of the earth." Yudhishthira's heart tightened. He had lost so much already: the lives of his brothers, his kingdom, his people, and the future he had envisioned. The very world he had fought to protect now seemed a distant memory. Still, Yudhishthira knew the core of Dharma. It was not bound by affection or selfish desire. It was an unwavering commitment to the greater good, to the balance of the universe, and to the divine will that shaped all things. In his final moments, Yudhishthira stood resolute, his spirit unmoved by the tempests of grief that threatened to overtake him. He was tested in ways that no mortal could foresee. The call of his loved ones, who had perished in the war, echoed in his ears. Yet he recognized that the divine order required him to transcend the bonds of this world. And so, with a steady heart, Yudhishthira chose Dharma once more, surrendering all his attachments, knowing that true righteousness could not be tainted by personal desire. His test was not one of battle, but of the soul of letting go of everything he had ever known to accept the will of the divine. In that moment, the last remnants of his earthly struggle faded away. Yudhishthira, the embodiment of Dharma, stepped forward into the unknown, leaving behind the legacy of his devotion to duty. His journey was complete, and he had passed his final test. In the vastness of the cosmos, his spirit merged with the eternal, where duty, righteousness, and truth resided beyond all earthly concerns. King Dhritarashtra, the blind patriarch of the Kaurava family, had always been a man bound by his love for his children, especially his eldest son, Duryodhana. His blindness was not merely physical, but extended to his judgment, clouding his perception of right and wrong. Despite knowing, deep down, the dangers his son's ambitions posed to the kingdom and the world, Dhritarashtra's loyalty to his family blinded him to the consequences of their actions. His adherence to familial loyalty, a devotion that once seemed noble, would become the source of his greatest sorrow and remorse. After the war had ended, the dust settled, and the once mighty Kaurava kingdom lay in ruin. Dhritarashtra, now a man broken in both body and spirit, was left to reckon with the aftermath of his decisions. The deaths of his 100 sons, the fall of his dynasty, and the desolation of a kingdom that had once been full of life weighed heavily on him. He had spent years in the shadow of his own inaction, unable to confront the terrible path that his loyalty to Duryodhana had forged. In the silence that followed the war, Dhritarashtra found himself haunted by memories of the countless warnings he had ignored, the counsel he had refused to heed. He had known the righteous path, but had chosen to protect his son over the greater good. The blind king now had no choice but to face the ruin he had helped create. His grief was not just for his children, but for the kingdom and people who had suffered because of his neglect and denial. Alone in the palace that now seemed like an empty shell of its former self, Dhritarashtra spent his days in solitude, his mind racing through the endless mistakes he had made. He could no longer shield himself with the blinders of familial loyalty. His attachment to Duryodhana, to the idea of his son's power and supremacy, had consumed him. In the quiet of the night, he began to understand that his devotion had not been love, but a refusal to acknowledge the cost of unchecked ambition. The weight of this realization was suffocating. Dhritarashtra's introspective journey became one of regret and sorrow, but it was also a path toward understanding. As he walked through the ruins of his once great dynasty, he began to see the truth in a way he had never done before. His actions, though driven by a father's love, had led to the destruction of his family. His blindness, both literal and metaphorical, had been the cause of the downfall of the Kauravas. He had chosen to ignore the suffering of others, thinking only of his own flesh and blood, but now he understood that true leadership required more than loyalty. It demanded wisdom, justice, and the ability to see the greater good. Dhritarashtra's final days were marked by a quiet surrender to the truth he had long avoided. He could no longer cling to the illusions of past glories or the belief that loyalty alone could justify the cost of his family's ambition. The man who had once ruled a kingdom now lived in the shadow of his own guilt, a king who had lost everything: his family, his kingdom, and his sense of self. King Dhritarashtra, the blind patriarch of the Kaurava family, had always been a man bound by his love for his children, especially his eldest son, Duryodhana. His blindness was not merely physical but extended to his judgment, clouding his perception of right and wrong. Despite knowing, deep down, the dangers his son's ambitions posed to the kingdom and the world, Dhritarashtra's loyalty to his family blinded him to the consequences of their actions. His adherence to familial loyalty, a devotion that once seemed noble, would become the source of his greatest sorrow and remorse. After the war had ended, the dust settled, and the once mighty Kaurava kingdom lay in ruin. Dhritarashtra, now a man broken in both body and spirit, was left to reckon with the aftermath of his decisions. The deaths of his 100 sons, the fall of his dynasty, and the desolation of a kingdom that had once been full of life weighed heavily on him. He had spent years in the shadow of his own inaction, unable to confront the terrible path that his loyalty to Duryodhana had forged. In the silence that followed the war, Dhritarashtra found himself haunted by memories of the countless warnings he had ignored, the counsel he had refused to heed. He had known the righteous path, but had chosen to protect his son over the greater good. The blind king now had no choice but to face the ruin he had helped create. His grief was not just for his children, but for the kingdom and people who had suffered because of his neglect and denial. Alone in the palace that now seemed like an empty shell of its former self, Dhritarashtra spent his days in solitude, his mind racing through the endless mistakes he had made. He could no longer shield himself with the blinders of familial loyalty. His attachment to Duryodhana, to the idea of his son's power and supremacy, had consumed him. In the quiet of the night, he began to understand that his devotion had not been love, but a refusal to acknowledge the cost of unchecked ambition. The weight of this realization was suffocating. Dhritarashtra's introspective journey became one of regret and sorrow, but it was also a path toward understanding. As he walked through the ruins of his once great dynasty, he began to see the truth in a way he had never done before. His actions, though driven by a father's love, had led to the destruction of his family. His blindness, both literal and metaphorical, had been the cause of the downfall of the Kauravas. He had chosen to ignore the suffering of others, thinking only of his own flesh and blood. But now he understood that true leadership required more than loyalty. It demanded wisdom, justice, and the ability to see the greater good. Dhritarashtra's final days were marked by a quiet surrender to the truth he had long avoided. He could no longer cling to the illusions of past glories or the belief that loyalty alone could justify the cost of his family's ambition. The man who had once ruled a kingdom now lived in the shadow of his own guilt, a king who had lost everything: his family, his kingdom, and his sense of self. Bhishma, the grand patriarch of the Kuru dynasty, was a figure of immense strength and unwavering honor, a man whose life was dedicated to the ideals of duty, loyalty, and righteousness. Born to King Shantanu and the river goddess Ganga, Bhishma was blessed with both wisdom and a sense of responsibility that set him apart from the other warriors of his time. His oath of celibacy, taken to ensure the throne passed to his father's chosen successor, was a testament to his devotion to Dharma, the cosmic law that governed right conduct. Bhishma's life, however, would never be one of peace and untroubled rule. Instead, he found himself perpetually entangled in the web of duty, bound by family, loyalty, and honor. His legacy, forged in the fires of countless battles, was one of paradox. Bhishma was both revered and feared. His very presence on the battlefield was enough to send ripples of dread through the hearts of his enemies. He stood as a rock, unyielding to the winds of fate, yet the choices he made often forced him into positions where his honor was tested beyond measure. The chaos of the war at Kurukshetra, the great battle that he had tried so hard to prevent, consumed him as it did so many others. Yet Bhishma did not falter in his adherence to the values he held dear. His decisions, while often tragic, were governed by an unwavering commitment to what he believed was right. This loyalty, however, was his undoing. As Bhishma lay on the battlefield, grievously wounded by Arjuna's arrows, his death was not an ordinary one. He was granted the boon of choosing his time of death, and so, his passing was not a simple end, but a moment of profound significance. Even as he lay on a bed of arrows, Bhishma continued to impart his wisdom to the Pandavas and Kauravas alike, offering insights into the nature of duty, righteousness, and the complexities of life. His final moments were filled with reflection and spiritual clarity as he spoke on the fleeting nature of power and the eternal nature of Dharma. Bhishma's words, though often clouded in sorrow, held the weight of a lifetime of experience, a legacy of honor that would endure long after his death. In his death, Bhishma became a symbol of the eternal conflict between personal desires and the greater good. His willingness to sacrifice his own happiness for the sake of his family's honor, his unshakable resolve in the face of personal loss, and his ability to remain true to his principles in the most dire of circumstances were what defined him. Though he was not without flaws, Bhishma's legacy was one of unwavering dedication to duty, honor, and the moral compass that guided his every action. His death was not merely the passing of a great warrior, but the end of an era where honor, duty, and sacrifice were the ultimate measures of a man's worth. Even in death, Bhishma's wisdom continued to shape the course of history, his life a reminder of the complexities of honor amidst the chaos of human existence. Krishna, the divine incarnation of Vishnu, stood as the pillar of wisdom and guidance throughout the Mahabharata. His role in the great epic was not merely that of a divine protector or strategist. He was a teacher, a philosopher, and the embodiment of truth. From the very beginning of the story, Krishna's presence was felt as he guided both the Pandavas and the Kauravas, though his allegiance was with the former. However, his guidance transcended the boundaries of war and politics, delving deep into the essence of life itself. The most profound of Krishna's teachings is found in the Bhagavad Gita, where he imparts a timeless philosophy to Arjuna, who is paralyzed by doubt and moral confusion at the onset of the Kurukshetra war. In Arjuna's moment of crisis, Krishna becomes not only his charioteer, but his spiritual mentor, revealing the ultimate truths of existence. As Arjuna stands on the battlefield, torn between his duty as a warrior and the moral implications of killing his kin, Krishna offers him a framework for understanding the nature of life, death, and duty. Through his teachings, Krishna reveals the eternal cycle of birth and death, urging Arjuna to rise above his fears and attachments. He emphasizes the importance of performing one's dharma-owned duty without attachment to the fruits of actions, thus guiding Arjuna to act with righteousness and without selfish desire. Krishna's philosophy in the Bhagavad Gita touches upon the concept of karma, the law of action, and its consequences. He teaches that every action, whether good or bad, carries consequences, yet it is one's intention that shapes the outcome. Through this, Krishna urges Arjuna to perform his duty as a warrior without hesitation, for his actions, done in accordance with Dharma, are beyond reproach, regardless of the outcome. Krishna's wisdom provides Arjuna with the clarity he needs to overcome his paralysis, turning him into a warrior willing to face the challenges ahead with a sense of divine purpose. Beyond the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna's guidance throughout the Mahabharata reveals his deeper understanding of the nature of human existence. He is both a strategist and a mystic, offering pragmatic counsel in the heat of battle, while also guiding the Pandavas on a spiritual journey. His influence, subtle yet omnipresent, extends beyond his direct teachings to the way he interacts with the world. His actions are never solely motivated by personal interest, and in every encounter, he acts in service to the greater good, seeking to bring balance to a world threatened by chaos. Krishna's teachings emphasize the importance of detachment, the pursuit of selfless action, and the understanding that all paths lead to the divine. His wisdom is not confined to the pages of the Mahabharata. It resonates through the ages, inspiring countless generations to seek a deeper understanding of the self and the universe. In Krishna's guidance, there is a harmonious blend of practicality and spirituality, offering a path to peace, both within oneself and in the world at large. As the divine charioteer, Krishna showed not only how to win battles, but how to conquer the greater war within the human soul. The women of the Mahabharata stand as pillars of strength, wisdom, and resilience in a world dominated by men. While the epic primarily revolves around the battles, politics, and moral dilemmas faced by its male protagonists, the role of women is no less significant. Their stories intertwine with the central narrative, serving as both catalysts and reflections of the larger themes of dharma, justice, and sacrifice. At the heart of the epic is Draupadi, a woman whose life is marked by both immense suffering and unmatched strength. Born from the fire during a ritual sacrifice, Draupadi's arrival is as extraordinary as her journey. She is the wife of the 5 Pandavas, but her status is not defined solely by her marriage. Draupadi's dignity is challenged when she is humiliated in the Kaurava court during the infamous game of dice. Her public humiliation, where she is dragged into the hall and disrobed, becomes one of the defining moments of the Mahabharata. Yet, Draupadi's response to this suffering is not one of submission. Instead, she calls upon Krishna, her divine protector, who intervenes to save her, proving that even in the face of dehumanization, divine justice prevails. Throughout the Mahabharata, Draupadi's resilience in the face of adversity remains a symbol of unwavering strength and resolve. She is not a passive figure, but an active participant in the story, a catalyst for the war that follows, and a woman who constantly challenges the traditional roles imposed upon her. Kunti, the mother of the Pandavas, plays another crucial role in the narrative. Her strength is rooted not in the battlefield, but in her selflessness and her ability to endure the suffering and sacrifices demanded of her. Kunti's journey begins with her own sacrifice, as she raises her sons in the face of hardship and the absence of her husband. As a mother, she is a guiding force for the Pandavas, and her wisdom helps them navigate the treacherous political and familial landscape. Kunti's decisions, particularly her decision to share the truth of her son's birth with them, show her commitment to Dharma and to the greater good. Her wisdom, foresight, and devotion to her sons have a lasting impact on their lives, especially during the time of exile and their eventual return. Beyond Draupadi and Kunti, the Mahabharata features several other significant female characters whose stories contribute to the epic's deeper themes. Gandhari, the mother of the Kauravas, embodies maternal sacrifice. She chooses to blindfold herself for life out of respect for her husband, Dhritarashtra, who is blind. Her sacrifice, however, does not shield her from the tragic fate of her sons. She is left to mourn the destruction of her entire lineage, a poignant reminder of the futility of blind devotion when not tempered by wisdom and foresight. The Mahabharata's women contribute to its larger themes by embodying the complex interplay of power, destiny, and morality. Their suffering, resilience, and wisdom add depth to the narrative, showing that the epic is not merely the story of men at war, but of the forces that drive the world, both the feminine and masculine, and the moral consequences of their actions. Through their experiences, the epic teaches that while men may fight for kingdoms, it is often the women who bear the weight of loss and the burden of duty, ensuring that the cycle of Dharma continues through their strength. The Bhagavad Gita stands as one of the most profound and revered texts within the Mahabharata, offering timeless wisdom that resonates far beyond the epic itself. In the midst of the chaos of the battlefield at Kurukshetra, Arjuna, the greatest of the Pandavas, is overwhelmed with doubt and moral confusion. Faced with the prospect of fighting against his own kin, his teachers, and his friends, Arjuna is torn between his duty as a warrior and the moral implications of the violence he is about to commit. In this moment of crisis, Krishna, his charioteer, steps forward not only as his guide in battle, but as a spiritual teacher, offering a perspective that transcends the material and the immediate. Krishna's teachings to Arjuna unfold over a series of verses that explore the nature of life, death, and the eternal self. At the heart of these teachings is the concept of dharma, or duty. Krishna emphasizes that Arjuna's primary duty is as a warrior, and it is his responsibility to fight for justice and righteousness. However, this duty is not defined by mere allegiance to family or personal attachment. It is rooted in the broader cosmic order, where each individual has a role to play in maintaining balance and harmony. Krishna explains that the actions of a warrior in battle are not tainted by personal desires, but are expressions of divine will, fulfilling a higher purpose. He encourages Arjuna to act without attachment to the outcomes of his actions, a concept that will later be known as karma yoga, or the path of selfless action. Krishna's philosophy goes beyond the immediate concerns of the battlefield. He teaches Arjuna about the impermanence of the body and the eternal nature of the soul. The physical body, Krishna explains, is merely a vessel that holds the eternal soul, which cannot be destroyed. This perspective shifts Arjuna's focus from the death of his relatives and friends to the understanding that the soul transcends life and death. This view of the eternal soul offers solace in the face of loss, reinforcing the idea that death is but a transition, not an end. Krishna's words serve to help Arjuna overcome his fear of death and his emotional turmoil, urging him to embrace the duty before him with clarity and resolve. As the Gita progresses, Krishna also delves into the concept of bhakti, or devotion to the divine. He teaches that true spiritual liberation comes not through self-centered actions or detachment from the world, but through wholehearted devotion to God. Krishna's role in the Gita is not only that of a teacher, but also as a manifestation of the divine, showing Arjuna that surrendering to the divine will lead to ultimate freedom. This relationship between the individual and the divine becomes a central theme in the Gita, encouraging Arjuna and, by extension, all beings to seek union with the divine through love and devotion. The teachings of the Bhagavad Gita ultimately guide Arjuna through his moral crisis, transforming his understanding of duty, righteousness, and the nature of existence. By the end of Krishna's discourse, Arjuna is no longer paralyzed by doubt, but is empowered to fulfill his duty as a warrior, equipped with a higher understanding of life and the cosmos. The Gita is not just a conversation between Krishna and Arjuna. It is a universal dialogue on the nature of life, the self, and the divine, offering timeless wisdom for anyone who seeks to navigate the moral dilemmas of life with clarity and purpose. The Kauravas, driven by jealousy, pride, and an insatiable desire for power, had been the architects of their own undoing. Throughout the Mahabharata, their actions revealed a path steeped in deceit, cruelty, and relentless ambition, with little regard for dharma, the righteous way of living. Their continuous plotting against the Pandavas, including the rigged game of dice and the subsequent exile, was just the beginning of their karmic downfall. Every misdeed they committed, from the dishonoring of Draupadi to the bloodshed on the battlefield, stacked a heavy weight on their karmic balance, and the repercussions would not be far behind. In the epic, karma plays a crucial role. Each action, whether good or bad, sets the stage for future consequences. The Kauravas, in their relentless pursuit of power, disregarded the deeper values that govern human life. Their arrogance, fueled by Duryodhana's bitter resolve to see the Pandavas crushed, blinded them to the larger spiritual and moral forces at work in the universe. With every step they took against justice, their karmic debt grew, and the divine forces of the universe began to shift against them. On the battlefield of Kurukshetra, the Kauravas' karma finally caught up with them. The war, a culmination of years of betrayal, hatred, and manipulation, became a conduit for the karmic retribution that each Kaurava would face. As the fight raged on, many of the Kauravas perished in a manner befitting their misdeeds. They fell not just due to the might of the Pandavas and their allies, but because of the weight of their own actions. The divine forces seemed to conspire against them, ensuring that their fate was sealed, for in the great cosmic cycle, no injustice could remain unpunished forever. The demise of the Kauravas was not only physical but spiritual. One by one, Duryodhana's brothers met their end, each death a reflection of their own violent, vengeful nature. Karna, despite his immense valor and loyalty, was also bound by his own karmic path. Though he fought with honor, the curse of his past, particularly his loyalty to Duryodhana and the role he played in the injustices against the Pandavas, could not be escaped. In his final battle with Arjuna, he fell, his fate sealed by the actions of his earlier years, the accumulated weight of his karma dragging him into death. The Kauravas, despite their efforts and their wealth, could not escape the inexorable law of cause and effect. In the larger cosmic scheme, the Kauravas' tragic end serves as a reminder of the potency of karma. Their demise, though it came at a great cost and amidst tremendous loss, fulfilled the divine order. The war at Kurukshetra, which claimed so many lives, was not just a battlefield of weapons, but a grand play of cosmic justice. The Kauravas' curse was not merely the consequence of the battle they fought, but the result of their entire life's actions, reflection of how every individual's choices reverberate through time, creating the cycles of birth, death, and rebirth. The Mahabharata leaves us with the clear truth that karma, like a river, cannot be diverted, and one must bear the consequences of their actions, however long it may take for them to reach their final destination. The fall of the Kaurava dynasty is one of the most tragic and inevitable moments in the Mahabharata, marking the end of a lineage that once held immense power but was consumed by greed, ambition, and a disregard for righteousness. From the very beginning, the Kauravas were a symbol of moral decay, their foundation built on rivalry and deceit. Their actions, guided by Duryodhana's obsessive thirst for power, led them down a path of destruction, culminating in their complete annihilation. Throughout the epic, the Kauravas' downfall is foreshadowed. Their first major act of wrongdoing, the deceitful game of dice, sets the tone for their entire existence. The mistreatment of the Pandavas, their dishonor of Draupadi, and their refusal to offer even a small share of land to the rightful heirs of the kingdom were all steps that pushed them further away from the path of Dharma. Every transgression, each selfish act, was a seed planted that would one day bear bitter fruit. The seeds of destruction took root deep within their hearts and minds, and no matter how much they fought or schemed, their fate was sealed by the cosmic order. The war at Kurukshetra became the final battleground, not only for the Pandavas and Kauravas, but for the very soul of the Kaurava dynasty. The battle, raging with intense violence and loss, was a manifestation of the internal strife that had plagued the Kauravas. As each warrior fell, whether in direct combat or through the consequences of their own actions, it became evident that the Kaurava dynasty was not just losing the battle, it was disintegrating from within. The death of Bhishma, the revered grandfather, was the first great blow to the Kaurava family. His fall marked the beginning of the unraveling of their moral and military might. Bhishma's death, though noble in some aspects, signified the loss of the family's honor. The Kauravas, even in their greatest strength, could not escape the consequences of their own arrogance. Karna's death was another devastating blow. A man of great valor and loyalty, Karna's alignment with the Kauravas, despite his virtuous nature, proved to be his undoing. The curse of his past, his actions in favor of Duryodhana, and his refusal to break free from the destructive path led him to an inevitable demise. His death at the hands of Arjuna signified the fall of the last great hope for the Kauravas. As the war raged on, the final destruction of the Kaurava dynasty seemed imminent. Duryodhana, the driving force behind their dark journey, met his end in a tragic, symbolic duel with Bhima. In the waters of his death, Duryodhana's pride was humbled, and with it, the last vestige of the Kaurava strength disappeared. In his final moments, Duryodhana realized too late that his devotion to ambition, his disregard for Dharma, and his pride had cost him everything: his brothers, his kingdom, and his life. By the end of the war, the Kaurava dynasty lay in ruins. The once mighty family had been reduced to ashes. The gods, the warriors, and the people all recognized that this fall was not simply the loss of a kingdom, but a reminder of the consequences of living in opposition to divine law. The Kauravas had fought to the bitter end, but in the end, their annihilation was a necessary act of cosmic justice, a grim yet inevitable outcome of their long descent into chaos. Fate, in the Mahabharata, is an omnipresent force that shapes the lives of every character, weaving their destinies in ways both subtle and undeniable. The epic emphasizes that no one, no matter how powerful or righteous, can escape the path set by fate. It is not simply a predetermined outcome, but a force that intertwines with the actions and decisions of individuals, creating a complex web of cause and effect. The characters in the Mahabharata, though blessed with free will, find themselves bound by fate in ways they cannot avoid or deny. The Pandavas, though virtuous and devoted to Dharma, are not immune to the whims of fate. Their journey, marked by exile, hardship, and battles, seems cruel and unfair at times, as they endure suffering despite their righteousness. Yudhishthira, the eldest Pandava, is tested in ways that challenge his very understanding of justice and destiny. His decision to gamble away his kingdom and the subsequent loss of his brothers was a result of his own actions, yet it also felt like the hand of fate was pressing down on him, leading to a seemingly inevitable series of events. The Great War itself, with its immense loss of life, is portrayed as a tragic but inescapable consequence of their destinies, forged by the choices of generations past. Similarly, the Kauravas, driven by pride and ambition, find themselves caught in the same cosmic dance. Their collective downfall is not just a result of their evil deeds, but also an illustration of the inexorable pull of fate. Duryodhana, with all his strength and cunning, could never escape his fate of destruction. The series of unfortunate events that lead to the war are depicted not merely as bad luck, but as the unfolding of a greater cosmic plan. The Kauravas, despite their many transgressions, are also mere players in a grander design, one that they cannot alter, no matter how hard they fight. Karna's story is perhaps the most poignant example of fate's inescapability. Though he is a man of unmatched valor and loyalty, his life is marked by an unrelenting struggle against the curse that haunts him. His loyalty to Duryodhana, his tragic ignorance of his true heritage, and his ultimate death on the battlefield all seem written in the stars long before the war even began. Karna's tragic end serves as a reminder that even the noblest of hearts cannot escape the burdens of their past, nor can they outrun the threads of destiny that bind them. Through the Mahabharata, fate is shown not as a distant, cold force, but as something that is intertwined with the moral choices, ambitions, and flaws of individuals. It illustrates the inescapability of destiny, the tragedy of human struggle against forces greater than themselves, and the profound lesson that no one can avoid the fate that awaits them. Every victory and loss, every tear and triumph, is ultimately part of a larger cosmic planon that can never be fully understood, only accepted. The Mahabharata shows that, in the end, fate is not just the end of the journey, but the very journey itself. Dharma, the guiding principle of duty, righteousness, and moral order, is the backbone of the Mahabharata, influencing every action, decision, and path taken by its characters. It is not merely a set of rules, but a complex, dynamic force that governs both personal conduct and the very fabric of the cosmos. The epic paints Dharma as something that transcends simple morality, often placing its followers at the crossroads of difficult choices, where right and wrong are not always clear. Yet, in the Mahabharata, the importance of Dharma is always paramount, even when it leads to seemingly insurmountable challenges. Yudhishthira, the eldest Pandava, exemplifies this commitment to Dharma. His life is marked by constant tests of his moral compass, and even in the face of devastating consequences, he holds firm to his principles. When he is forced into the game of dice and loses everything, including his kingdom, he remains steadfast in his commitment to Dharma. His decision to not fight back against the deception and treachery of the Kauravas is a reflection of his belief that Dharma is not to be bent, no matter how dire the circumstances. In moments of great hardship, Yudhishthira's dedication to righteousness, even when it leads to personal loss, demonstrates the gravity of Dharma. He values truth and righteousness above all, even when the world around him falls apart. Similarly, Arjuna, the greatest of warriors, faces a monumental moral crisis on the eve of battle. His hesitation to fight against his own kin and teachers, despite the divine command to do so, highlights the internal conflict between his duty as a warrior and his personal relationships. Arjuna's confusion about Dharma is one of the central themes of the Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna serves as his guide, teaching him that Dharma is not bound by personal emotions, but by a higher moral order. Krishna instructs Arjuna that duty must come first, that the warrior's responsibility is to fight for justice, even against those he loves. This divine counsel marks a turning point, as Arjuna learns that Dharma requires the courage to act in accordance with universal laws, not personal desires. The Mahabharata also reflects the consequences of deviating from Dharma. Duryodhana, the Kaurava prince, is consumed by his ambition and pride, choosing to follow his personal desires at the expense of righteousness. His actions lead to the downfall of his entire family, proving that Dharma, when neglected, inevitably results in disaster. Despite his immense power and wealth, Duryodhana's disregard for Dharma is his undoing. His path contrasts sharply with the Pandavas, whose adherence to Dharma, even when it leads to suffering, ultimately ensures their success and spiritual redemption. In the end, the Mahabharata reveals that Dharma is not a rigid set of rules, but a complex and evolving understanding of what is just and right in a world full of contradictions. It teaches that while the path of righteousness is often difficult and fraught with sacrifice, it is the only true guide to navigating the trials of life. The value of Dharma lies not in its ease, but in its ability to elevate the soul, offering meaning and purpose amidst chaos. It is through Dharma that the epic's heroes find their way, proving that moral integrity, even in the face of overwhelming odds, is the highest virtue one can aspire to. The central theme of the Mahabharata is the eternal conflict between good and evil, a struggle that plays out on the battlefield of Kurukshetra and within the hearts and minds of its characters. On the surface, the dichotomy appears simple. The Pandavas embody righteousness, while the Kauravas represent evil. However, the epic masterfully unveils the complexity of this moral divide, illustrating that good and evil are not always so easily distinguishable. The Mahabharata asks its audience to question not just who is good and who is evil, but what it means to be one or the other. The Pandavas, with their commitment to Dharma and justice, are the embodiment of good in the epic. Yet, their path is not one of simplicity or purity. Their struggles are rife with doubt, sacrifice, and moments where their righteousness is tested. Yudhishthira, the eldest Pandava, is often faced with difficult moral choices where there is no clear right or wrong. The war itself is born from his adherence to the principles of Dharma, even when it results in immense suffering and loss. He must sacrifice his own happiness, kingdom, and family for the sake of justice. This complex nature of the Pandavas' goodness forces us to reflect on the burdens of righteousness. Show good is not always easy or flawless, but rather a continual commitment to moral integrity despite the world's chaos. In contrast, the Kauravas, led by Duryodhana, represent the forces of evil, yet their motivations are equally nuanced. Duryodhana's desire for the throne and his hatred of the Pandavas may appear selfish and wrong, but he is not a one-dimensional villain. He sees himself as a rightful heir, and his deep sense of loyalty to his family and friends, though misguided, renders him sympathetic at times. The Kauravas, in their ambition, act as the foil to the Pandavas' more self-sacrificial path. Yet, as the epic unfolds, it becomes clear that their disregard for Dharma, their willingness to deceive, cheat, and destroy to claim power, ultimately leads them down a path of destruction. Duryodhana's refusal to accept any reconciliation, even when offered by Krishna, represents the final culmination of his commitment to his own desires over the welfare of others, highlighting the darker side of ambition and pride. Krishna, as the divine force guiding the Pandavas, plays a pivotal role in this battle between good and evil. His teachings to Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita reveal the necessity of fighting for righteousness, even when the lines between right and wrong blur. Krishna does not see the war as simply a battle between two sides, but as a cosmic war between the forces of order and chaos, justice and injustice. His role is to help the Pandavas navigate this complexity, ensuring that their actions, while sometimes harsh and difficult, are aligned with a higher moral purpose. In the end, the Mahabharata reveals that the battle between good and evil is never simple or clear-cut. The true nature of this conflict lies in the choices made by individuals, their struggles with their own desires, their understanding of duty, and their relationships with others. Good and evil are not static forces, but evolving concepts, shaped by personal decisions and the circumstances in which they are made. The epic teaches that the fight between light and darkness is not just external, but internal, a constant negotiation within each individual and society. The Mahabharata is a profound meditation on the importance of moral choices, illustrating how every action, no matter how small, ripples through the fabric of life and carries consequences. Throughout the epic, the characters are repeatedly confronted with moments of ethical decision-making, each carrying a weight that shapes not only their own fates, but also the destiny of entire kingdoms. The epic's central lesson is that individuals must be conscious of their choices as they shape their identities and the world around them, for better or worse. At the heart of the narrative lies the tragic tale of the Pandavas and the Kauravas, two families bound by fate, yet torn apart by moral decisions. The Pandavas, while fundamentally noble, are not exempt from making mistakes. Yudhishthira, the eldest, faces his greatest test when he must gamble away his kingdom, his brothers, and even his own freedom in a game of dice. This seemingly small choice sets into motion a series of events that lead to the devastating war of Kurukshetra, where countless lives are lost. The weight of Yudhishthira's decision to partake in the game and his failure to recognize the moral consequences at the time shapes the course of his life and the future of his family. Yet, this tragic error also becomes a lesson, teaching that even the most virtuous must remain vigilant in their actions, for a single wrong choice can alter the course of history. Similarly, the Kauravas, with their blind ambition and refusal to act with honor, demonstrate the destructive power of selfish decisions. Duryodhana, driven by his thirst for power, chooses deceit, manipulation, and violence as his means to an end. His moral failures are Numarushis, plotting to kill the Pandavas, his disregard for Dharma, and his refusal to accept peace even when it is offered. His choices culminate in the devastating war, where both sides suffer immensely. Duryodhana's downfall is a direct result of his refusal to make morally sound choices, showing that unchecked desires and a lack of self-awareness lead only to destruction. Krishna, as the divine figure and guide throughout the Mahabharata, continually emphasizes the need for righteous actions. His teachings to Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita remind us that one must act in accordance with Dharma's duty, without attachment to the outcome. Krishna teaches Arjuna that the act itself, done with righteousness, is more important than the results. Arjuna's moral dilemma, where he must choose between fighting for justice or abandoning the war to avoid the destruction of his kin, is resolved through Krishna's counsel that moral clarity comes when one acts selflessly, in alignment with divine will. The Mahabharata thus teaches that every choice carries consequences that extend far beyond the immediate moment. Even small actions, seemingly insignificant at the time, accumulate to shape the future. In its sweeping narrative of victory, loss, and redemption, the epic underscores that the true measure of a person is not found in their ability to win or gain power, but in their capacity for self-reflection and the courage to make difficult, moral decisions. The Kurukshetra war, though a grand and bloody conflict between two great families, holds a deeper, symbolic meaning that transcends the battlefield. At its core, the war represents the eternal, internal struggle that every individual faces, the battle between righteousness and unrighteousness, good and evil, duty and desire. The epic's portrayal of this war is not merely a historical account, but a powerful metaphor for the psychological and moral struggles that each person must confront within themselves. On the battlefield of Kurukshetra, the warriors are not only fighting for land and power, but for the supremacy of their inner values. The Pandavas, who represent Dharma, the principle of righteousness, are constantly in conflict with the Kauravas, who stand for adharma, or unrighteousness. Yet, the lines between good and evil are not always clear-cut. Each character is forced to confront their own flaws, doubts, and contradictions. Yudhishthira, for example, is virtuous, yet his involvement in the game of dice reveals his susceptibility to human weaknesses. Arjuna, the hero of the epic, experiences a crisis of faith and moral hesitation at the start of the war, questioning the righteousness of the battle and his role in it. The true nature of the war comes into focus through Krishna's guidance. His teachings to Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita are not simply about duty in a physical battle, but about the spiritual warfare that takes place within the soul. Krishna urges Arjuna to fight, not for the material rewards of war, but to fulfill his duty without attachment to the outcome. This reflects the deeper message that every action we take is part of a larger internal struggle, where we must choose between selfish desires and the higher calling of moral integrity. Krishna teaches that victory is not defined by external conquests, but by one's ability to overcome inner turmoil and to align with Dharma. The Kurukshetra war also symbolizes the clash between different aspects of the self. Bhishma, Drona, and Karna, while aligned with the Kauravas, are all complex figures who struggle with their personal sense of duty, loyalty, and honor. Bhishma, for instance, remains loyal to the Kaurava throne, despite his personal affection for the Pandavas. His tragic fall is symbolic of the consequences of adherence to duty at the expense of personal integrity. Drona, too, is torn between his allegiance to the Kauravas and his love for the Pandavas, reflecting the internal conflict of attachment versus duty. In the end, each of these characters succumbs to the contradictions within themselves, reinforcing the message that unresolved internal conflict inevitably leads to destruction. Thus, the Kurukshetra war serves as a profound reflection of the battles within the human psyche. It illustrates that every individual must navigate the complexities of life, facing the duality of human nature. Just as the warriors in the epic fight for their values, so too must each person strive to conquer their internal enemies, doubt, fear, desire, and ignorance in order to align with the higher truth and achieve spiritual victory. In the Mahabharata, the gods are not distant, ethereal beings removed from the world of humans. Instead, they are deeply intertwined with the fate of the characters, guiding, influencing, and sometimes directly intervening in the unfolding events. Their presence is felt throughout the epic, as their actions shape the destinies of the Pandavas and Kauravas, often in ways that transcend human understanding. The gods' interventions are not merely acts of divine power, but are deeply connected to the themes of duty, morality, and the larger cosmic order. Krishna, the divine incarnation of Vishnu, plays the most significant role in the Mahabharata. As a friend, guide, and charioteer to Arjuna, Krishna offers his counsel at crucial moments, most notably during Arjuna's moral crisis on the battlefield. The Bhagavad Gita, a dialogue between Krishna and Arjuna, is not just a philosophical discourse but a divine intervention in itself. Krishna's teachings on duty, righteousness, and the nature of life and death reflect the cosmic laws that govern the universe, reminding Arjuna through him, the audience, that every action has its place within the grand design of the cosmos. Krishna's guidance is instrumental in helping Arjuna transcend his doubts and fears, enabling him to fulfill his duty as a warrior. While Krishna's intervention is central, other gods also play important roles throughout the epic. Indra, the king of the heavens, provides Arjuna with celestial weapons and protection, enabling him to overcome overwhelming odds. Arjuna's mother, Kunti, invokes the blessings of the gods, each of her sons being born through divine intervention. The gods, in their various forms, act not only as protectors, but as agents of fate, ensuring that the course of events unfolds in alignment with the ultimate cosmic order. However, the gods' interventions are not always straightforward or benevolent. In the Mahabharata, divine actions are often complex and morally ambiguous. The gods support the Pandavas in their righteous cause, yet they are also the ones who allow the brutal war to unfold, knowing the suffering and destruction it will bring. This paradox highlights a central theme of the epic, the tension between divine will and human agency. The gods provide the tools and guidance necessary for victory, but the warriors must choose how to wield them, facing the consequences of their actions. The gods' involvement underscores the idea that the human struggle is not separate from the divine. They do not shield the heroes from pain or failure, but push them towards self-realization and spiritual growth. Ultimately, the gods' role in the Mahabharata emphasizes that human beings must navigate their lives according to the principles of Dharma, even if divine intervention makes the journey more difficult. The gods, through their actions, remind us that the forces shaping our lives are often beyond our understanding, yet it is our duty to act in accordance with the greater cosmic order. In the Mahabharata, knowledge stands as one of the most powerful forces, shaping not only the actions of the characters, but also the very nature of the epic itself. Wisdom and learning are presented as vital tools for navigating the complex moral landscape of the world, offering guidance in both spiritual and strategic matters. The character's pursuit of knowledge, whether through spiritual enlightenment or tactical expertise, becomes a recurring theme, underlining the profound impact that understanding and insight have on the unfolding of the epic. At the heart of this pursuit is the figure of Krishna, who embodies divine wisdom. His teachings to Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita are not only practical instructions for action but also profound spiritual revelations. Krishna teaches Arjuna the importance of seeing beyond the material world and understanding the greater cosmic principles of duty, dharma, and righteousness. In these teachings, knowledge transcends mere intellectual understanding. It becomes a means of spiritual liberation, a path to recognizing the true nature of existence and the interconnectedness of all life. The wisdom imparted by Krishna serves to elevate Arjuna's awareness, helping him to overcome his inner turmoil and align his actions with the higher laws of the universe. Beyond Krishna, knowledge plays a crucial role in the lives of many other characters. Yudhishthira, the eldest of the Pandavas, is often portrayed as a model of wisdom. His unwavering commitment to Dharma and his decisions throughout the war reflect a deep understanding of the moral complexities he faces. However, Yudhishthira's journey also highlights the limitations of knowledge. Despite his deep spiritual and moral insights, his decisions are often weighed down by the harsh realities of war, and his struggle to maintain righteousness in a world full of deceit and manipulation is one of the epic's most poignant aspects. On the battlefield, knowledge also manifests as strategic and tactical intelligence. Arjuna, with his exceptional martial prowess, is not just a skilled warrior, but one who understands the importance of timing, tactics, and adaptability. His success in battle is not simply the result of brute force, but is guided by knowledge passed down through generations of warriors. Throughout the war, the Pandavas rely on the wisdom of veterans like Bhishma and Drona, whose expertise in military strategy plays a decisive role in the outcome of battles. Drona, for instance, uses his knowledge of warfare to train the Kauravas, although his teachings ultimately become a double-edged sword as they lead to both heroic feats and tragic outcomes. In contrast, the Kauravas, particularly Duryodhana, demonstrate how knowledge can be distorted when used for selfish purposes. Duryodhana's refusal to accept counsel or engage with the wisdom of others, especially Krishna's teachings, leads him down a path of destruction. His lack of spiritual insight and refusal to learn from the lessons of Dharma are a stark contrast to the wisdom embodied by the Pandavas. In the Mahabharata, knowledge is not an abstract pursuit, but an essential force that guides characters toward their fate. Whether spiritual or strategic, wisdom has the power to shape the world, enabling individuals to navigate the moral complexities of life and war. Yet, the epic also reveals the limitations of knowledge when it is applied without humility or ethical consideration. In this way, the Mahabharata offers a profound meditation on the role of wisdom in shaping human destiny and the cost of its misapplication. The Mahabharata, with its vast narrative and intricate web of characters, continues to cast a long shadow on culture, philosophy, and spirituality. Its teachings, embedded deeply in the fabric of Hindu thought, resonate far beyond the confines of the epic itself, influencing generations of thinkers, poets, rulers, and spiritual seekers. The legacy of this monumental work lies not only in its story but in the timeless wisdom it imparts, touching on themes that are universally humanity, honor, righteousness, and the pursuit of justice. Culturally, the Mahabharata has shaped art, literature, and music for centuries. Its tales of valor and tragedy have been retold in countless forms, from classical dances like Bharatanatyam to elaborate theatrical performances. The intricate symbolism, from the Pandavas' journey to the battlefield to the philosophical teachings delivered by Krishna, is often depicted in temples and murals. Its characters, especially figures like Krishna, Arjuna, and Draupadi, have become iconic within the broader Indian cultural lexicon. Their stories serve as archetypes, embodying virtues and flaws that are as relevant today as they were millennia ago. The Mahabharata's influence is visible in the festivals, rituals, and dramas that continue to be celebrated, from the staging of Ram Leela to the performance of traditional folk plays. Philosophically, the Mahabharata's impact is profound. The Bhagavad Gita, as one of the central texts of the epic, has been a beacon for thinkers throughout history, guiding philosophical discourse on morality, ethics, and the nature of the self. Krishna's teachings to Arjuna transcend their immediate historical context, addressing fundamental questions about the purpose of life, the nature of duty, dharma, and the balance between personal desires and the greater good. These teachings have resonated with philosophers such as Mahatma Gandhi, whose interpretation of nonviolent resistance and the importance of selfless action drew from Krishna's discourse. Similarly, the Gita has been a source of inspiration for philosophers in the West, particularly in the realms of existentialism and ethics. Its exploration of the mind, detachment, and self-realization has found parallels in other philosophical traditions, making it a universally influential text. Spiritually, the Mahabharata remains a cornerstone of Hinduism, offering insights into the relationship between the divine and the human. Krishna's guidance to Arjuna, especially in moments of despair and indecision, serves as a template for spiritual practice, teaching that true wisdom comes from surrendering to divine will and aligning oneself with higher principles. The Mahabharata explores the complexities of human emotions and actions, reflecting the inner struggles every person faces. Its depiction of the war within, of battles fought in the mind and soul, has inspired spiritual seekers to reflect on their own internal conflicts and the path towards self-realization. The Mahabharata's legacy is not confined to the past. It remains a living text, inspiring modern-day discussions on leadership, ethics, governance, and personal growth. Its universal themes continue to resonate, serving as both a mirror and a guide for those seeking meaning in the face of life's challenges. Through its enduring presence in literature, philosophy, and spirituality, the Mahabharata's influence persists as one of humanity's most significant contributions to the understanding of life's deepest truths. The Mahabharata, in its sweeping narrative of war, ambition, and divine intervention, offers profound insights into the human condition. Its characters are not mere figures in a historical epic, but reflections of the complexities of human nature itself. At the heart of the story lies the struggle with power, identity, and the inevitable loss that comes with life's impermanence. The lessons of the epic speak not only of the external battles fought on the fields of Kurukshetra, but also of the internal wars each person faces within their heart and mind. Power is a central theme in the Mahabharata, and the epic does not shy away from depicting its corrupting influence. The Kauravas, led by Duryodhana, exemplify the dangerous allure of power, driven by greed, envy, and a thirst for control. In their pursuit of domination, they ignore the moral consequences of their actions, leading them down a path of destruction. The Pandavas, on the other hand, embody a more complex relationship with power. Yudhishthira, the eldest of the Pandavas, is a ruler who constantly grapples with his sense of duty, dharma, responsibility, and the burden of leadership. Despite his righteousness, the weight of kingship takes a heavy toll on him, demonstrating that power, even when wielded justly, comes with its own share of pain and sacrifice. At its core, the Mahabharata is an exploration of human desires and the consequences they bring. Arjuna's moral struggle on the battlefield, Krishna's teachings on the nature of duty, and the ultimate fates of the warriors reveal the complexities of human emotion. The characters act from motives that are often tangled in personal desires, familial duty, or the demands of fate, but they ultimately find that their actions lead them to irreversible consequences. In the end, even the victorious Pandavas cannot escape the inevitable costs of war. Their triumph is marred by the loss of loved ones, the destruction of their homeland, and the moral disillusionment that follows the war's conclusion. It is a reminder that success, if it comes at the cost of one's values, can ring hollow and leave a bitter aftertaste. The inevitability of loss is perhaps the most poignant lesson the Mahabharata offers. Death, defeat, and sorrow permeate the narrative, but they are not just external events. They are intrinsic to the fabric of life. Every character, regardless of their strength, wisdom, or virtue, faces the inescapable reality of loss. Bhishma, a towering figure of honor and duty, meets his end on the battlefield, embodying the tragic reality that even the most virtuous cannot evade the ravages of time. Similarly, Krishna's departure marks the end of an era, highlighting the transient nature of divine intervention and the cycles of creation and destruction that define existence. Through its characters and their journeys, the Mahabharata teaches that human nature is both flawed and noble. It shows us that power, while necessary, is fraught with peril, and that loss, though painful, is an essential part of the human experience. Ultimately, it offers a reflection on the necessity of confronting one's own inner turmoil, the inevitability of fate, and the importance of striving for wisdom and moral clarity in the face of life's transitory nature. The Mahabharata, in its vast narrative, speaks to a profound and timeless truth. Life is cyclical. The epic's characters live through cycles of birth, growth, conflict, loss, and renewal, mirroring the broader patterns of existence that shape the universe. From the very beginning of the story, where we are introduced to the great families of the Pandavas and Kauravas, to its tragic end, where the remnants of both dynasties face death, the cycle of life and death plays a central role in the unfolding drama. This cyclical nature is not merely a recurring event in the story, but a key message that transcends the individual fates of the characters and speaks to the universal nature of existence. The story begins with a conflict between two families, one rooted in righteousness, the other in envy and greed. The war that follows, the Kurukshetra War, is a culmination of centuries of karmic build-up, the result of actions taken in previous lives and deeds. In this way, the Mahabharata reflects the idea of the eternal return, the belief that actions and their consequences are cyclical, endlessly repeating until the soul attains liberation. Each battle, each struggle, is an echo of a larger, cosmic pattern, and the outcomes are both predetermined and yet shaped by the choices of the individuals involved. As the story unfolds, the idea of fate is ever present, with each character playing out their role in the grand cosmic design. The Pandavas, despite their righteousness, cannot avoid the consequences of past actions, and their path is marked by loss, hardship, and suffering. Yet, even in their suffering, there is a deeper understanding of the cyclical nature of their journey. As they move through the war, the loss of life, and the eventual restoration of their kingdom, they begin to understand the impermanence of the world and the inevitability of both creation and destruction. Krishna, the divine guide, plays a crucial role in shaping the understanding of life's cyclical nature. He teaches Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita that life and death are part of a greater cosmic cycle. Bodies may die, but the soul is eternal, transcending the cycles of birth and rebirth. The teachings of Krishna suggest that understanding this cyclical process is essential to living a life of meaning and righteousness. The realization that life is but a moment in an endless series of lifetimes allows one to let go of attachment and act with clarity of purpose. In the end, the deaths of the Pandavas are not the conclusion, but a return to the beginning. Their journey, like the cycles of nature, does not end in a finality, but leads to another phase in the grand cycle of existence. The souls of the Pandavas, having fulfilled their destinies, ascend to heaven, signifying their release from the cycle of birth and death. Through their journey, the Mahabharata teaches us that life, death, and rebirth are inseparable aspects of existence. It is in understanding and accepting this eternal return that one can attain peace and liberation, breaking free from the endless cycle of suffering. As the final chapter of the Mahabharata unfolds, we are left with a profound sense of both closure and introspection. The epic, spanning generations and filled with unforgettable characters, leaves its readers and listeners with not just a story of war and triumph, but an intricate web of lessons on duty, morality, fate, and the inevitable cycles of life. The conclusion does not merely mark the end of a great narrative, but instead emphasizes the enduring relevance of its core themes to the human experience. The Pandavas, having completed their arduous journey, are now free from the world's illusions and the burdens of power, finally realizing that true victory lies not in material conquest, but in the liberation of the soul. The greatest lesson of the Mahabharata is perhaps the impermanence of all things. The rise and fall of kingdoms, the shifting of power, the transience of life, all of these are woven into the fabric of the epic. The Pandavas, who once ruled with great power, are now left with nothing but the wisdom and understanding that they have gained through their trials. Their final journey symbolizes the process of relinquishing attachment to the worldly, realizing that everything in life is temporary and that the ultimate goal is spiritual liberation. The physical world, with all its pleasures and pains, is but a fleeting illusion. In the end, the greatest gift one can possess is an unwavering understanding of Dharma righteousness and the acceptance of the divine will that shapes the course of all lives. The Mahabharata also underscores the complexities of human nature. Good and evil are never clear-cut. Throughout the story, we see characters whose actions, whether virtuous or flawed, are shaped by circumstance, inner conflict, and the complexities of Dharma. The Kauravas, though antagonists, are not devoid of humanity, and their actions, driven by envy and a thirst for power, remind us of the destructive consequences of greed and hatred. The Pandavas, on the other hand, embody virtues like truth, justice, and sacrifice, but even they must grapple with doubts, mistakes, and the harsh realities of war. In this, the epic teaches that the path of righteousness is fraught with challenges and that even the noblest of individuals can falter. It is through these struggles, however, that the soul becomes refined, attaining wisdom that transcends the material world. In conclusion, the Mahabharata is more than just an epic of war. It is a deep meditation on the essence of life. It asks its readers to question the nature of duty, the weight of decisions, and the meaning of existence. Through the victories, the losses, and the sacrifices of its characters, the Mahabharata leaves behind an indelible legacy. It teaches that all lives are interconnected, that the choices we make reverberate beyond our understanding, and that our ultimate goal is to seek truth and harmony with the divine. In the end, it is not the wars we fight or the kingdoms we build, but the wisdom we acquire in our journey that determines the true nature of our lives. The Mahabharata, though set in an ancient world filled with kings, warriors, and gods, offers timeless lessons that resonate deeply with modern audiences. The complexities of its characters, each struggling with their own inner battles, moral dilemmas, and existential questions, serve as a mirror reflecting the challenges faced by individuals and societies even today. At its heart, the Mahabharata teaches that life is not a simple dichotomy of good versus evil, but a vast landscape filled with grey areas, where the right path is often unclear and the consequences of our actions ripple far beyond our comprehension. One of the most powerful lessons of the Mahabharata is the importance of dharma, or duty. The epic repeatedly demonstrates that personal desires and emotions often conflict with the greater responsibilities one must fulfill for the good of society, family, or the self. Yudhishthira, the eldest Pandava, embodies the struggle between personal righteousness and the duties placed upon him as a king and a leader. His inner conflict, particularly in the aftermath of the war, resonates with modern-day audiences grappling with the tension between personal desires and societal obligations. Whether it's the responsibility of a leader to a nation or an individual's duty to their family, the epic underscores that every choice carries weight, and understanding one's duty is a critical step toward achieving both personal and collective harmony. Another enduring lesson is the inevitability of consequences. Throughout the Mahabharata, every action, whether virtuous or destructive, creates ripples that shape the destiny of individuals and communities. The Kauravas, whose greed and malice eventually lead to their downfall, illustrate the dangers of unchecked ambition and the pursuit of power at any cost. In contrast, the Pandavas' pursuit of righteousness, despite the personal and collective suffering it entailed, ultimately leads to their redemption. The concept of karma, the law of cause and effect, weaves through the entire narrative, reminding modern readers that our actions, whether small or monumental, will have consequences, and that every choice has an impact on the future. Krishna's teachings to Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita hold particular relevance today. His discourse on the nature of the self, duty, and the impermanence of life offers profound wisdom for navigating modern life's chaos. Krishna's insistence on detachment from the results of one's actions encourages a healthy perspective on success and failure, teaching that true peace comes from focusing on doing one's duty without being overwhelmed by the outcomes. In an age where success is often measured by external markers like wealth and power, this wisdom is particularly vital. Finally, the Mahabharata serves as a reminder of the complexity of human nature. No character is purely virtuous or entirely villainous, and even the most righteous figures struggle with their own flaws and vulnerabilities. The epic's ability to present multidimensional characters who navigate their personal struggles against a larger backdrop of cosmic conflict invites modern readers to embrace empathy and humility. The Mahabharata's wisdom teaches that the human experience is one of constant evolution, where every choice, no matter how small, contributes to the unfolding of one's destiny. In a world that often seems divided by simple judgments, this complexity offers a powerful lesson in tolerance, understanding, and the need for self-reflection. The Mahabharata, though centuries old, continues to captivate hearts and minds across the globe, offering insights that transcend time, culture, and geography. Its relevance today lies in its exploration of fundamental human experiences, the conflict between good and evil, the pursuit of duty, the weight of choice, and the search for meaning in a chaotic world. These themes, deeply embedded in the human condition, ensure that the Mahabharata remains as pertinent now as it was in ancient times. At its core, the Mahabharata is a study of the human soul, its triumphs, struggles, and flaws. The characters are not idealized heroes or one-dimensional villains. They are complex beings, driven by conflicting desires, torn between personal ambition and moral obligation. This complexity mirrors the human experience, where individuals often find themselves at a crossroads, uncertain about the right course of action. The epic's portrayal of characters like Yudhishthira, Arjuna, and Duryodhana reflects the inner battles that all people face, the constant tension between righteousness and self-interest, between moral duty and emotional impulse. As such, the Mahabharata remains a powerful mirror to the self, offering timeless lessons about self-awareness, integrity, and the consequences of one's choices. Furthermore, the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita, one of the most revered parts of the Mahabharata, continue to resonate with modern audiences. Krishna's wisdom, offered to Arjuna on the battlefield, speaks to the struggles faced by individuals today, the need to balance personal desires with a greater sense of duty, the importance of detachment from the outcomes of one's actions, and the necessity of maintaining one's moral compass amid life's uncertainties. In an era where many feel disconnected or overwhelmed by the pressures of modern life, the Gita's teachings on selfless action, inner peace, and spiritual clarity offer a profound guide to living with purpose. The Mahabharata's relevance is also rooted in its exploration of the concept of dharma duty, or righteousness, and its implications for personal and social life. Today, individuals across the world continue to wrestle with the question of what is their responsibility to themselves, their families, and their communities. The Mahabharata teaches that fulfilling one's duty, despite the inevitable suffering or challenges it may bring, is integral to personal growth and societal harmony. It emphasizes that duty is not always easy to uphold, but it is the path to a deeper sense of fulfillment and understanding. The epic's narrative, which includes gods, sages, and heroes alike, reminds readers that the divine is not distant from human experience, but intricately woven into it. The gods intervene, not as omnipotent beings detached from human suffering, but as guides who offer wisdom to those who seek it. In this sense, the Mahabharata teaches that spirituality is not separate from everyday life, but is deeply embedded in our choices, actions, and relationships. Ultimately, the Mahabharata's timeless nature lies in its exploration of universal truths about the human experience. It offers profound insights into the complexities of human nature, the search for meaning, and the path towards spiritual enlightenment. As a work of literature and spirituality, it continues to inspire, challenge, and guide readers, ensuring its place as one of the most significant contributions to world culture. As the story of the Mahabharata gently draws to a close, it leaves behind a profound silence, a quiet space, where the deepest wisdom settles softly into the heart. This silence is not empty. It is filled with the weight of countless lessons, the echoes of battles fought both on the battlefield and within the soul. The epic, vast and complex, does not offer tidy resolutions or simple answers. Instead, it invites each listener, each reader, into a personal reflection, encouraging a journey inward that continues long after the final words have faded. The Mahabharata's true power lies not in its grandeur or its dramatic events, but in the subtle wisdom. It imparts wisdom that cannot be rushed or grasped all at once. It whispers of the complexity of Dharma, the importance of embracing life's contradictions, and the acceptance of suffering as an inseparable part of existence. It teaches that life's greatest battles are not only fought with weapons, but with the mind, the heart, and the conscience. And through this quiet understanding, the story becomes less a distant legend and more a living guide, resonating uniquely with every soul who listens. What is remarkable is how the Mahabharata speaks differently to each person. For some, it is a narrative of heroic valor and tragic loss. For others, it is a profound philosophical text that explores the nature of reality, duty, and liberation. Some find in its verses a mirror for their own struggles with right and wrong, while others discover solace in its call to surrender ego and embrace a higher purpose. This multiplicity of meaning is part of its enduring magic, allowing the epic to live on, evolving and adapting to the needs of countless generations. In its silent wisdom, the Mahabharata reminds us that life is neither purely good nor wholly evil, neither simple nor certain. It is a tapestry woven with threads of joy and sorrow, success and failure, love and betrayal. Through its timeless narrative, it invites us to walk our own paths with courage and compassion, to make choices grounded in integrity, and to accept the consequences with grace. It teaches that peace is not found in victory alone, but in understanding and embracing the whole journey of existence. As the final echoes of the Mahabharata fade into the quiet, they leave behind a calm that encourages stillness and contemplation. The story does not demand resolution, but gently opens a space for questions about who we are, what we value, and how we live. In this way, the Mahabharata becomes more than an epic. It becomes a companion for life, offering guidance that is as much felt in the heart as understood by the mind. And so, as the tale rests, the listener is invited to sit with this silence, to carry its teachings gently forward, and to allow the story's silent wisdom to settle deeply within. Here, in this quiet place, the Mahabharata's eternal truth lives on, waiting patiently to awaken in each new generation, continuing to inspire, challenge, and comfort long after the story's last breath.